What's your pleasure, sir? To start with the cliches, time to raise some hell in this podcast.
Yeah, we have such sights to show you, which a line which does not work at all here, since this is pure audio product and does not have a visual aspect.
Now, get creative and do an audio version of that. What would it be?
We have such ear rape to offer you.
We have a winner and welcome to the Flick Lab. I'm Karri, he's Henrik. How are you?
I'm kinda okay-ish, I guess. A bit nervous on today's episode.
Goddamn.
Yeah.
Is there any films that I could throw at you that you are not having some troubles with?
I really don't know. This far, the track record has really not been in any way on that side.
I guess it's kind of our quality also in here. You know, we always kind of overdo it, don't we? But on the other hand, that's what makes this podcast for me, so...
Kind of the same thing here. Although I have to admit that there are numerous times when overdoing these films is actually quite a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it is. But I noticed that if I just watch the movie, there is nothing that I would specifically always find. Just with that, I have to salivate it a little bit. Maybe watch it even for a second time. And read the goddamn history of the film. That's where we get the meat around the bones.
The background work really is something that many times actually tries to drive me completely nuts behind the scenes of the episodes. Especially since this is a weekly feature, which means that you have, in worst cases, you have only a few days time to actually try to do your background research for every episode.
Yeah, and honest to God, or any other kind of higher power, I didn't start it like this. It wasn't even my intention. It was my intention to make this kind of as easy as possible. but I just refuse to do that. I need something more. I want to do something more. And that's my benefit and flaw in life in general.
The podcast sure has gone through numerous changes already this far. During the a little over half a year we have now done the podcast. There has been quite a lot of changes that have happened. Pretty much small things, but still for us quite significant alterations that we have made.
Oh really? I thought that the backbone of this has been the same from the beginning.
Well, we have become way more analytical in our approaches to films as the episodes have run. We have lessened the fact where we try to make snarky comments when we go to film scene by scene, as, for example, was something that we still tried to achieve back in the Rear Window episode.
Well, feel free to make snarky remarks. Just they are not always forthcoming from me, but you are the snark comment expert. I say it as in all the positive ways.
Then again, I think that we have managed to become something more serious than just trying to be snarky and nitpicky. So I'm not saying that the changes have been necessarily negative or something that we shouldn't have done. Also, something that our long-time listeners may have noticed is that we have quite truly and well dropped the drink of the episode theme, which we were trying to keep up to the point in our first episodes.
That concept was flawed from the beginning.
Yeah, it was. It truly was. It was a concept that really didn't give you that much room to maneuver. Like, to have many different types of drinks to consume between the episodes would have meant that we would have had to kind of jump from film to film much more quicker. Like, we couldn't, for example, do many American horror movies back to back because most of the American horror movies drink Bud Light. or Budweiser or something like that. So, a point that came extremely and painfully clear to us when we were doing the Halloween franchise.
Yeah, it was a good idea, and it is a kind of idea that we could use in future episodes. Maybe specifically we could leave it to horror movies, or for sure to Halloween movies. I mean, I think it's like a necessity. If they're still going to punch out the next Halloween next year or the year after that.
As they most likely will now that since Halloween 2018 made all the money.
Yeah, I'm already hearing some rumblings, Henrik. It's starting to look like that it's either next year or the one after that. Well, we always like to go back to Haddonfield in this podcast, at least to make some snarky remarks.
Yep. And after Halloween 2018, I mean, we both have a completely different opinion of the film, but I'm kind of actually waiting to see the next Halloween sequel for a change.
Okay, well, I'll be honest. I'm completely and utterly still not interested of seeing anything. I'm still feeling the Halloween exhaustion. I have no idea in which directions they are willing to take this, and I just don't care. Right now, I don't care.
On my end, I do care, but I too would not like to see another Halloween movie anytime soon. Not even visiting the old classic scenes. I'm still weary from the Trek that, which was going through the entire franchise.
Yeah, and now being so familiar with the franchise, you know so many of the flaws, and you're so goddamn aware of them now that it would be extremely hard to go through something like even Halloween 4 or, well, 5 for sure, and onwards. And apologies in advance. Well, not in advance, because we are already recording, but apologies for the background noise. This is the absolute best location that I was able to get at this moment, because my particular hostel goddamn sucks, because there's just too many people. I tried to record in the lobby areas and the corridors. Impossible. I tried to go to the famous Francuska Street in the Praga section of Warsaw, but every goddamn place is so noisy and full of people on a Tuesday night. I don't know what's wrong with people. Why do you have coffee at 7 p.m. in Tuesday night? But they do, and yes, I'm back in Warsaw. Hopefully I'll find some work here so I can get back to my nonsensical love of Poland.
So, once again, recording the episode on the road.
Yeah, well, that's kind of, I don't know. For me, that's one sort of attraction of this podcast.
In a way, yeah. It is a thing where you never actually know where the next episode is going to be recorded at.
Oh, I wanted to ask you, do you even yourself remember anymore where you have recorded all of the 30 plus episodes?
I'm not completely sure, now that you ask. At least I do remember most of the places where I have been doing these episodes.
Now you're in Rovaniemi, Finland.
Yup. Been here, luckily now have been here for a number of episodes. So I have had the luxury of a stable environment when doing the recording. Of course, that is going to change once again at the end of this month, when I, on my end, hit the road for 2 weeks. And those episodes, once again, will be recorded on my end in some very improvised locations. Seeing the workload we are dealing with here in the lab, it would be the next Christmas when we have a next break.
I was thinking like midsummer. That's where I have marked the next break. At least.
I most definitely do have a kind and understanding master in you.
Today's movie, Hellraiser. This is kind of your movie. You did review once again this to our website that we used to write for, and you did write some reviews for the sequels after that.
Yeah, I did have that go at the franchise during that point. Luckily, those reviews are actually lost to the time.
I wouldn't be so sure. They are still on my hard drive.
No, they ain't. Delete them.
Oh my god.
I have some recollection of the language used in some of those reviews and my attempts at trying to be snarky and edgy. And oh boy, is that cringeworthy material.
How old were we, actually? We were...
Fucking teens. Were we even teens?
We were like 17, 18. You were a little bit... well, you're not so much older than me.
No,
so...
I beat you like with 2 months.
Right. And I don't know why I always had this idea like you're like the big brother of this team, but age-wise, but I don't know where that came from. But yeah, you did those, and would you kind of see yourself as a Hellraiser fan?
I most definitely am a Hellraiser fan.
And how did that come about? When did you first see this, and how was it?
You mean how did I meet with Hellraiser, or how did I meet with this particular film? Because my entry point to the franchise actually is the 4th film, Bloodline.
Okay, well, let's start with those.
Yeah, so Bloodline, I had been aware of Hellraiser before I ever saw Bloodline for the first time, but I had never had the pleasure to see any of the films. Bloodline was I believe it was the first Hellraiser film which had a major release in Finland as a VHS. In a sense that Bloodline was the tape that you could find pretty easily from any supermarket that sold VHS tapes. And it was the Hellraiser film that you eventually could find from the bargain bin.
Yeah, the famous Hellraiser where Pinhead goes to space.
Pinhead in space, basically. Still, I do think that it is better than its reputation says. And especially with Bloodlines, there is the fact that there are like 2 versions of the film. There is the unreleased director's cut, which dwelled very hard and big themes, for example, comparing the main hero of the film to Pinhead and drawing these parallels between the Cenobites and the humans. All those points were actually axed from the film mid-production, thanks to our friend and neighbor Harvey Weinstein, who once again had his meddling hands in the production process. So the final version that you have, the released version of Hellraiser 4, it is very much the bastardized version of the film, to a point where the director of the film actually demanded that his name is not tied to the released product.
Regarding bastardization, well, it's a strong word, but there were a bunch of changes that now feel extremely silly, even regarding the first film, but we'll get to that later. But, so you saw Hellraiser 4, Bloodline, and...
Yeah, my little brother got it for me as a Christmas present. A film which he had no business in buying, legally wise. So I don't know who he actually tricked into buying the film for him so that he could gift it to me. But yeah, my first entry to the franchise is thanks to my little brother.
That's sweet. What a Christmas present. And did you then see the first one?
Yup. The next in line was the first one. And with the first one, it actually is quite an unbelievable story because when it comes to the original Hellraiser, my background with the film actually parallels the film itself and the puzzle box that is very prominently featured in Hellraiser mythos. Because when I originally started with horror and became a horror fan, I did that extremely early. I was very young when I got interested in horror and started to pay attention to horror circles. So I did manage to be a horror fan still when the Finnish movie censorship and banning movies was going on in Finland. It was the late years of the film censorship, but I did manage to have a few good years of being a horror fan when the scissors run high in Finland. In Finland, we never have had the pleasure of having a genre-specific magazines, like, for example, US there is Fangoria, which is a horror film-specific magazine. We have had a couple of attempts at that in Finland, the latest being the Blood Ceremony magazine, which ran it like for 14 issues and was cancelled after that. So we never have had a true prominent magazine that would follow horror movie news. Instead, in Finland, being a horror fan would require you to in any way try to get into the circles. And the whole horror scene very much lived from mouth to mouth information, and these 6 or 7 time copied bootleg tapes that someone would sneak into Finland from Sweden or Norway or somewhere else, and then you would gather in a small group into a dim room to watch extremely poor quality VHSs. But that was the only way to, get the uncensored version of something like Friday the 13th or any of the horror films. But in those circles, there was kind of this mythical notion of the film Hellraiser, which was supposed to be the dankest shit ever and one of the greatest horror films. Everyone who had ever seen Hellraiser vouched for it and said that that's definitely a horror film you need to see yourself, but you just couldn't get your fucking hands on it in Finland. No way. And this was also the early stages of the internet, so the file sharing community was not there in the capacity that you could get this through internet. So I spent years looking for Hellraiser, and my only clues about the film itself were only, what I could hear from others and something that I could read on some obscure fan page. Early 90s, web pages which were completely terrible, but which had some extremely low-res pictures of the film. And during those times also, the small video boutiques were very prominent in Finland. You basically had, in every city, you had a few shops that specialized in selling VHS tapes. Mine was in Tampere, a shop called Filmiaitta, which was the coolest place ever. It was dusty and poorly lit. It was halfway below the ground level, and the shopkeeper there was... Somehow he was able to get his hands in some of the most obscure and most... the stuff you couldn't even believe was on the market. I frequented Filmiaitta during those years, and it was simply pure accident that one day I would once again visit the film store and just go through the selection of VHS tapes. And there, completely at random, at one of the dark corners of the shop, there was a shelf which actually did have a Finnish release of Hellraiser. And...
When was this?
I no longer remember, it was so long time ago. Years back.
Yeah. Okay. As far as I remember, the first time that I most possibly saw the Hellraiser films, and I went in order. I saw them beginning from 1 and going all the way to probably 7 or 8. And I saw them because I was organizing for the first time the Night of the Horrors event, and I just had the bright idea that, okay, we need Hellraiser for one of those nights. There was a Nightmare on Elm Street night, and there was a Halloween night, and of course the Hellraiser night and Scream night. And somehow I had gotten my hands on what I think was the full series at that time. I have to say, I don't know, was I impressed by the film, the first one, when I saw it? I just remember that I was extremely disgusted by it, and kind of everything about it I felt was disgusting. And it took years before I returned to the franchise, and I think I've seen this film about 3 times or 4 times now. And it's one of those that has grown on me. As a kid, I felt that it wasn't very strong, but not sure what happens there, but once you grow older, you start to respect some things way more.
To me, Hellraiser was kind of the film that had a profound effect on me when I first time saw it. It kind of changed horror films, or the way how I see horror films for me. And in many ways, for me, it was a groundbreaking experience.
Yeah, and I can totally see that. I remember the year, it was 2002. Well, I did kind of like the first 2 right off the gate. And when it started to get past 3, then it kind of started to dilute one after the other. I remember when we were watching all of these, the whole franchise in one night, that I got really utterly bored around part 4 or part 5, and after that I was basically kind of like half sleeping through the rest of the episodes, and I have not even the faintest recollection of what even happens in those parts. But that's also one of the effects that happens when you watch so many movies tired in one weekend.
And with Hellraiser is the fact that it's one of those franchises which I feel do not hold up when done as a marathon.
Yeah. I guess Hellraiser is still kind of a concise in its universe, more so than maybe Halloween.
No, it no way is, in my opinion.
Okay.
My take on the franchise is that the first 2 films are absolutely fantastic. I actually like the second one even more than I like the first one.
I hear that a lot. Yeah.
To me, Hellbound is most defined as Hellraiser ever got. But after Hellbound, the whole franchise just nosedives, and it never recovered from that. Clive Barker was no longer the background presence after the second one, and boy does it show how the themes and ideas of Hellraiser are being translated in Hellraiser 3.
Yeah.
Ever after 3, the whole franchise is like, well, it's bad, but in Hellraiser's case, the badness of the franchise is a curious case where you can like some of the later sequels. They are not good films, but they are not as bad as some other sequels you have to suffer through if you are a Hellraiser fan. So, after the second one, the rest of the franchise and how well the franchise is after Hellbound, it's kind of on the scale how much dog shit every film is.
Yeah, and out of these big franchises like Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween and Friday the 13th, Hellraiser is the only one that finally went straight to video. And while we're talking about that, you don't have to know this, but if you do, please educate me. Is there some kind of a deal that they made with Clive Barker that kind of motivates the studio to keep on pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing the Hellraisers till the end of time? Because I heard some kind of ideas that as long as Hellraiser makes money, they are allowed to have the licensing for Hellraiser, and if it doesn't make any more money, then whatever that means, like in specifically, if they don't make any more money, then Clive Barker would somehow get the rights back, or does it make any sense to you?
It does. Like, I don't know what are the actual terms of the contract which has been made, but the situation with the franchise is, like you said, that they push out a Hellraiser film every now and then simply to keep on to the rights to the franchise, so that they would not lose the rights. That is the only reason why we still have Hellraiser films coming out today.
Oh.
And the franchise has gone into a point where Hellraiser 4 was the last Hellraiser film. Now, not with counting the latest one, The Judgment, but after Hellraiser 4, the films in the franchise were no longer written as Hellraiser films. They were the individual standalone horror films, which the studio then took the script and doctored to have some Hellraiser elements. Most notably, they copy and pasted Pinhead somewhere in the script, so that they could technically say that this is a Hellraiser film, and this way keep on holding the rights. Hellraiser Judgment, for the longest time now, is the first sequel after 4 that has actually been written as a true Hellraiser film. I've heard that Judgment also is not technically, well, maybe that good. I've heard 2 types of rumors. Others say it's complete dogshit, and others say it's one of the better Hellraiser sequels somewhere there with Hellraiser 4 maybe. But still not as bad as some entries to this franchise. But yeah, the Judgment is the only film or the latest Hellraiser sequel in years, which has from the get-go meant to be a Hellraiser film.
I don't get it. So you have some kind of a different script that has really nothing to do with Hellraiser, and you could do wonders with these characters if you wanted to, but you just choose to use Pinhead as some kind of a minimal amount in your film, just call it Hellraiser and not really being even a Hellraiser.
Well, Hellraiser Hellworld was a horror film about, well, not World of Warcraft, but still World of Warcraft, which had a few scenes. It had did it only have one scene at the end in which Pinhead appears? There was like 30 seconds of Pinhead in the entire film, and that's all you get about Hellraiser in Hellraiser Hellworld. But, with that 30 seconds, still technically a Hellraiser film. So the studio managed to keep the rights.
What's the point in the franchise where the franchise does the sin of horror movies, where they start to tell about the motives or the background of the character, in this case Pinhead? Is it in Inferno or
Bloodline?
Bloodline.
Well, you kind of get the background of Pinhead as you get it in parts 2 and 4.
Yeah.
Hellraiser 2 is the film that shows you the transformation of Pinhead. Shows you the human form and then shows you the transformation. And during Hellraiser 2, Pinhead, at the very end of the film, he once again remembers that he did used to be human once. That is all the background you get for Pinhead in Hellraiser 2, and Hellraiser 3 kind of expands from that and now ties Elliot Spencer, who was the human behind Pinhead, to World War II and starts to have some kind of a soul thing going on and God knows what else. And Bloodline is the film which tries to tell you the background of the puzzle box.
Yeah, wasn't it like, now that they are giving this background for Pinhead, then somewhere the films kind of make the case that Pinhead is not really doing what he wants to do, he's just being controlled by some kind of a evil entity, and it would be preferable if he could get back from hell to his human form, which he's unable to do, and it's really sad.
That, in a sense, has always been part of the Cenobites. The notion that there is something above them. In Hellraiser 1 and 2, the religious aspect of the Cenobites is very highlighted, to a point where Hellraiser 2 actually shows you some kind of a god which resides in this plane which, in lack of better term, is called hell. Something to note, which is important when tackling Hellraiser, is the fact that even though everybody always talks about hell, it's not supposed to mean hell in the religious Christian sense, but it's some other plane which is so kind of strange to us that we don't have a word for it, and in lack of a better term, we call it hell. And this hell has a god entity, which is called a Leviathan, which is shown to you in Hellraiser 2. But where it goes in Hellraiser 3, the series starts to make notion that Pinhead itself is a combination of a demon and a human soul, Elliot Spencer, which still somehow resides in combination inside the creature Pinhead.
Never mind Hellraiser 3 or 4. Or the other sequels as a whole, but what did you think about giving all the background information on the character? Was it good or no?
I did like it.
Okay.
Up until Hellraiser 3. That's where they dropped the ball, but I did like the background information given in Hellraiser 2. The notion that what Cenobites in the end are is that they are human, and that they are humans who have once opened the box and kind of gone through with everything that the other dimension has to throw at them. They have reached that point where hell no longer has more extreme surprises in store for them, and that they have accepted this other dimension, and they have come to understand that what they have gone through or what they go through in hell is form of pleasure. To me, it's very kind of an important notion when tackling Hellraiser.
Yeah, well, we all know that apparently when you reach a certain threshold of pain, there's a small moment where it actually might become pleasurable.
Yeah, the so-called limit experience.
Right, okay. The synopsis of Hellraiser. Well, there's a guy named Frank who buys a puzzle box and solves it. The only problem is this triggers the Cenobites, and I believe the Cenobites as a word is a pure invention of Clive Barker.
It's actually not.
Oh.
As far as I've actually understood, the word Cenobite comes from Old French, or Old Latin like.
Okay.
And what it means is, it means a member of a monastic religious order. Like, for example, a monk who lives in a religious community, rather than in solitude.
Okay.
So, the religious themes are something that are in the background of, for example, the theme of the limit experience, which are the pleasures of hell in Hellraiser. Because the notion of limit experience is something that you can also parallel, for example, to an ascetic or a monk or Buddhist who brings his body to its limits. For example, fasting extremely long times or some other way testing his spiritual and bodily limits for the religious purposes. That is something that you can kind of tie into the whole limit experience theme. There is also the notion how the Cenobites in Hellraiser are portrayed and taken as a members of some kind of a religious order. Like they have a god as shown, and in a sense what they are priests or high priests of hell, or the plane called hell in Hellraiser.
Okay, very thorough. Well, Frank opens the box and this triggers the Cenobites, and then we spent the rest of the film watching his attempt of returning back from hell back to the amongst of the living. So the story is quite straightforward.
That it is. Hellraiser is most definitely very condensed, and when you go plot point by plot point, quite simple horror story. The nuances come from the meaning behind this and that, and in the small examples that you get throughout the film. But as a straightforward story, Hellraiser is not the most grandiose one. Especially not the first one. The second one takes these concepts and runs way more further with them.
Yeah, I should also note or make the notion that I do believe that the second one, the Hellbound Hellraiser 2, is also my favorite. Because it takes the concept of the first one and kind of expands on it in a way that is really pleasurable. For example, the visit to hell or the area of Leviathan, I suppose. I haven't seen it in years, but I remember I enjoyed the landscapes.
I did too, and in my opinion, the version of hell that Hellraiser 2 gives you is one of the more imaginary ones, and it feels like a special place. Like it's one of its type in visionary design of a hell. It's not your typical fireballs and the very Christian religious imagery being used to portray hell, but instead of that, it's very much its own place. It's something that I have not seen pulled off in any other horror movie ever since.
That's a lot to be said. But I can believe that. When it comes to the source material of Hellraiser, we have to go back to Clive Barker, who wrote the book The Hellbound Heart, to which the first Hellraiser film is based on. Then also, years later, in I believe 2015, he did write the kind of a sequel, The Scarlet Gospels. There is also Hellraiser the Tall, written by Mark Allen Miller, but it's in some way closely tied to Clive Barker, which was written for some certain purpose, and it acts continuity-wise as the second part of the 3-book whole.
Yeah, as far as I've understood, the Toll is done so that the story itself comes from Parker, but he has another person write it to him, most likely because of Parker's health issues, which has hindered his ability to produce text in a fast pace.
Okay.
Yeah, and Toll, to my understanding, it is a sequel to Hellraiser, but it's a prequel to Scarlet Gospels.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Both of the books, which I myself have not yet read.
Same here. I did read the Hellbound Heart and found that it was, for the most part, kind of similar to the film.
Very similar. There is some small changes, but emphasis on word small.
Yeah. And there is an emphasis on certain bodily fluids straight out in the beginning, where Frank is apparently getting from this torture some kind of a orgasmic moment where like sperm is flying all around, if I understood that correctly.
That is precisely what happens. It's not made 100% sure. Is it just pure act of desperation, or does Frank actually get some real pleasure from the first tortures he has to go through? But yeah, he starts to spank the monkeys, so to speak, and does ejaculate all over the floorboards. And to give an example about the differences between the two versions, in film it's Larry who simply bleeds on the floorboards, which makes it possible for Frank to escape, but in the novel it's the blood which mixes with Frank's semen, or the leftovers of his semen, which form the kind of a pathway which Frank can use to escape.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. Maybe it's some kind of a sexual frustration that we see in the writing. But a little bit after the whole Hellraiser, he came out of the closet.
There is the notion that needs to be made is that this is the early Clive Barker. And Clive Barker himself, he started as a splatterpunk author. And splatterpunk is a subgenre of horror literature which was born kind of out of the video era. Yeah, so to quote Markku Sadelehto, who did collect the collection of the splatterpunk anthology which I have, Clive Barker's Hellbound Heart, there is the notion made that David E. Shaw has confessed that he came up with the term by taking the first part of splatter movies and a later part of the word cyberpunk. And the term was supposed to be a common denominator for the horror writers of the rock generation.
Okay, I see.
In splatterpunk, the building blocks very much were movies, TV, hard music, war to an extent, especially in the American splatterpunk authors were fixated in the Vietnam traumas and drugs, very graphic depictions of violence and sex. It was supposed to be this kind of a going to the limits music video era horror literature, and in my opinion often ham-fisted attempts to insert sexual acts to every single story is kind of one of the staples of splatterpunk.
Yeah, and definitely Hellraiser does go to certain limits right here, and
yep.
Certainly in its themes of hell and Cenobites. And the film was way more graphical from what I hear in its original form, but censors do their censoring, but we can get to the censored scenes later on in this podcast.
I myself never have been the biggest fan of splatterpunk, and that is kind of the biggest issue I have with Clive Barker's writing, especially the early years. Clive Barker. I've always thought that Barker is extremely visionary author who has the ability to really to envision these very outlandish and breathtaking landscapes. But goddamn, I just never have gotten into the kind of a trope level usage of sex in Barker stories. That is my biggest issue with Barker on page. The constant usage of sex. And I myself, I do think that Barker works better as a visual artist in forms of games and movies.
Yeah, and speaking of movies, this is Clive Barker's directorial debut. Yeah, so there were also Nightbreed, Lord of Illusions, and Clive Barker's Salome and The Forbidden.
That basically is Clive Barker's directorial career, unfortunately. He did do a shit ton of more writing, and there is a bunch of films that are based on his short stories, but as a director, Clive Barker kind of never recovered from Nightbreed flopping and Lord of Illusions not being the moneymaker that it should have been. Salome and Forbidden, on the other hand, are two short films that Clive Barker made before Hellraiser. They are extremely experimental and more of these kind of a meditative, artistic endeavors than actual short movies in a typical sense.
Yeah, and this whole Hellraiser project feels kind of like, in his own words, he also made the notion that it was kind of a hobby for him to do this project of Hellraiser, and it spawned from the fact that he had been dismayed at movie adaptations that had been made of his literary works, so he attempted to do Hellraiser by himself.
Barker had written The Underworld and Rawhead Rex before, filming Hellraiser, and both of those movies, in my opinion, suck quite a lot. So I do understand why when it came to Hellraiser, Barker himself was fed up with other people touching his work and doing films based on his stories and wanted to do the film himself.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that Rawhead Rex had some kind of interesting directions, but with a better director it could have been a whole different, well, no pun intended, beast. But like you said, he had created those, but meaning as he had written those stories. But once again, Hellraiser is his first project to direct. He also wanted an electronic music band called Coil to do the music, but it was rescored by Christopher Young on the insistence of the studio, and I was able to listen to the original Coil soundtrack, but I have to say I wasn't very impressed. Not sure what they were trying to do exactly here, but it would for sure sound very dated now. But even disregarding that, I don't see any way in hell, no pun intended, that this soundtrack or an electronic soundtrack in any shape or form would work in the film.
I also listened to the Coil soundtrack. On my end, I did like it in a way, and I can see how it could work with Hellraiser. With Coil it was much more minimalistic in its scope. It was more industrial. It had, for example, that sound of a metal pipe, which I really liked. And in my opinion, it kind of with that, Hellraiser would have felt maybe a bit more grimier. It would have made the film more gritty, in a sense. That all being said, I am, however, pleased with the producer's decision to leave Coil's soundtrack out of the film and instead put Young's soundtrack in its place, which I feel that is more grandiose and helps to present the Cenobites more as these great, more than you and me entities, and it helps to bring more notion to the religious aspects of the Cenobites. With Young's soundtrack and with the Barker's visuals, to me at least, the Cenobites come off kind of like if a pagan would meet the Inquisition. And I like that.
I have no idea what that means, but we will go with that. When I listen to the Coil soundtrack, there is no way that I could fit those particular pieces of music with the film that we now have, so I don't know if this was supposed to be the final soundtrack, or was this supposed to be something that could be like the groundwork for the final soundtrack, or whatever was going on. But like you, I'm very happy that Christopher Young's soundtrack is there. That being said, though, I'm very much into all kinds of experimental soundtracks. I just don't know how to fit Coil's stuff right here.
I could see the first 2 tracks of the soundtrack kind of working in the film. The track I have most problems with is the puzzle box theme, which has this kind of a circus element to it.
Yeah.
And, there I think that the soundtrack most misses the mark.
It's also one of the very few pieces of music from the Coil soundtrack that I could see that you could actually put it in the film. But Christopher Young, also one of his other soundtracks is one of my all-time horror film favorites, and that's kind of a funny notion to make about Nightmare on Elm Street 2, because there isn't a whole lot of cues in that film, or even music.
There is not a whole lot of anything in Nightmare on Elm Street 2. In Young's defense.
Well, we'd still have to do the Nose 2 episode, and I would disagree with you there, but the cues, the music that we have in that film from Christopher Young, that's all absolutely hellishly great, and I do enjoy a Hellraiser soundtrack as well. Granted, the Nightmare on Elm Street 2 soundtrack was at its most memorable and at its strongest with the featuring songs that are there that have nothing to do with Christopher Young.
That it was soundtrack-wise.
Yeah, but still. There was a comment from Clive Barker. He said that many people will be stunned by the elegance and the beauty of the image, and simultaneously appalled by the subject matter. And that kind of, I think, sums up Hellraiser pretty well. It's kind of disgusting, but you still enjoy some sick beauty in that ugliness. I understand the working title for this film was Cenomasochists from Beyond the Crave. Produced by Christopher Figg, he suggested the name Hellraiser instead of Hellbound. And after filming, New World convinced Barker to relocate the story to the United States, which required overdubbing to remove some of the British accents. And this is where we get to these funny studio decisions that don't quite make sense to me. Well, I can perhaps see that New World was looking for more like an international release for this film, and I'm not sure how well that film would be received at first if in the trailer you hear only British accents. There's something close to that.
I don't know, did it ever hurt the James Bond franchise?
Yeah, sure, but...
I mean, the British accent is not that off. Especially, the version that you get in films. Which is not the hard slang and hard accents that you could get, if you would actually visit UK. Yeah, like they don't use the actual Cockney accent in films.
But then again, this is very much known for being sort of a British horror film. There could have been a lot to climb to convince viewers or people who distribute the film to put it out there. If you have the British accents, I don't know, but that's definitely what seems that the New World was thinking at the moment. I think it's still kind of ridiculous because, well, now you have this film with less British accent and you still base it, or you're supposedly basing it somewhere in the US soil, right? Which was first supposed to be in England. And it very much still kind of has this kind of an England vibe. So it's kind of oddball to me.
Yeah. Then again, that's not something that is completely unheard of, even today.
Yeah.
In most of the major studio releases, it is kind of a norm that you have American characters that are being played by British actors.
Tony Randall, the person who directed the Hellbound, the Hellraiser 2, he is an uncredited second editor of this film. Then there's Ashley Laurence, playing Kirsty, and he was contractually obliged to do the Hellraiser 1 and 2. She herself enjoyed the first one much more. She is sort of an artist painter, kind of like Henrik. Or perhaps not, maybe you're still going to do the video games.
I most likely am gonna do the video games.
Then there's Andrew Robinson. His first film was Dirty Harry. He really didn't like the house. He said the house was as ugly as it looks on the film. And it truly does. It truly does. Everything is off-putting in this film, god damn it. But that's what they were looking for. Even the cast of characters are off-putting here, Henrik. Like, I do not like Andrew Robinson. I do not like, Frank or Sean Chapman. And I don't really like Clare Higgins either. And
as actors or as characters?
Well, I mean, the performances are actually quite weak for the most part in this film.
I, on the other hand, liked their performances extremely a lot.
I mean, if I have to go like performance-wise, I will give it right now, even before the quick categories, because I have to. Like Andrew Robinson, hands down, he has also the most interesting role because he has to double as the baddie in the end, and he does a marvelous job. But Clare Higgins, he kind of gets some kind of a praise for this film because she's like a established, long career-running theater actor, even though she gives a shit performance here. Then there's Ashley Laurence. The performance, there's nothing really to say about that. Sean Chapman, I don't know, like, people speak even weirdly in this film. Even the dialogue is creepy, how it's performed. I don't know, there's a lot of off-putting shit in this film.
And this comes from the guy who just a moment ago was wondering why the hell did they need American dubbing for the film.
Well, I mean, what do you mean?
Well, you said yourself, like, the speaking sounds awful. Like, can you just imagine, in that case, the original English audio?
No, well, maybe it was more convincing, or maybe it sounded more normal. Maybe that's it. Speaking American accent with a certain roughness that still remains in the performance, which is what you get normally in the British accent. I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird film.
I would just say that that's a weird opinion and nothing more.
Can I come in? Can I come in or not? That's weird line. Just.
It was said in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, I get that they were doing a character where, with the minimal amount of lines and performance, the story moves forward, and maybe he has this kind of aura of mysticity around him. With that, fuck this. This film is weird.
You can't come off and said that ever after Hellraiser there has been another performance which would have so much come to daddy in any other movie.
Yeah, basically like half of horror movies.
Well, not anywhere near like half of horror. There is insidiousness there.
Sure, and even then it's really weird, that whole scene and that whole line. I mean, it literally doesn't make much sense. It doesn't even make sense what he's trying to do there. But we can get to that in the scene by scene.
You just better remember, this discussion point as we get to the actual scene.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Andrew Robinson, he really enjoyed the character because he was able to play the baddie as well. The dark and the light in the same character in a sense. And he thought that Hellraiser 2 didn't have a good script. And he said he was ready to play in Hellraiser 2, but wanted to get only the same pay he got for the first one. So that's not asking a lot after the success of Hellraiser, but they wanted to pay even less than that, so he passed on the project. Again, some of these idiotic studio decisions that you just have to be kind of baffled what were they doing here. And then we have Sean Chapman. He said that he worked 6 days or so for the film. In the scenes where you have the Frank the Monster, a normal person with a normal average weight person would kind of look like the Michelin Man, as he said. So they needed Oliver Smith to play the Frank the Monster parts, because they put a lot of makeup and special effects stuff on the body. And Oliver Smith happened to be extremely thin individual and gave a good performance in his scenes. And of course there's Doc Bradley, and he's playing Pinhead. His first film, in fact. One of those legendary horror icons, as discussed. There's Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, and Pinhead. The four big ones. There's sort of a repulsive glamour about him that kind of puts it really well. Took about an hour to take off the makeup. Couldn't see much of anything through his contact lenses. And kind of in the Blu-ray you can kind of feel that he doesn't see shit behind those contacts. For Frank the Monster or Oliver Smith, took about 4 to 6 hours in makeup daily. Yeah, that's what you get in these horror makeup and prosthetics fiestas. It's a lot of work.
Robert Englund spent like 15 years in a makeup chair, thanks to the Freddy franchise.
That explains the facial features then.
If nothing else, it explains being pissed off and moving constantly around once the cameras are shooting. That is the secret behind an energetic performance.
Should we get to the scene by scene?
By all means, take us there.
Alright. We start with the logos as they usually start, and special mention for the New World Pictures logo and animation and music. I always like that one. Reminds me of United Artists. We start with a shot of the box, which is apparently now in Morocco. And we start with the well-known line, "What's your pleasure, sir?" And this film is all about disgusting. We have quickly a shot of a hand with these fingernails that are somewhat long, but the thing is there's dirt under the fingernails. Also the other guy's fingernails, what I think are the other guy's fingernails, look extremely rotten.
And once this episode comes out, no one is gonna pay any attention to your notion about the fingernails, but instead are simply gonna take your mentioning how everything in this film is disgusting to imply the fact that the opening scene appears to be somewhere, maybe Marrakesh, maybe Turkey. Like hard to say the exact location.
Yeah, I understand it was mentioned somewhere that it was supposed to be Morocco. Is it in the book?
It was in the original short story, if I remember correctly, where they have the background of how Frank originally heard about the box and how he came to acquire the box.
Well, it's hard not to pay attention to the ugly-ass fingernails in this scene and all the flying mosquitoes that you hear in the background, all trying to imply how disgusting everything is. I think that's the main point of that scene, and to get the box. Well, and then we get to the scene where Frank has the box and is surrounded by the candles. Some kind of like a mystical formation, or he's just getting into the zone to prepare to open the box. And he does open the box. It's kind of unclear what he's actually looking for here, in the film's universe anyway. Is he looking for pain? Is he looking for pleasure? Is he looking for new adventures of some sort?
He makes the notion that he was looking for pleasure. Some kind of a new form of pleasure he had already experienced and become bored with, or the traditional forms of pleasure.
Hence the best course of action is to play with the puzzle box that you clearly don't know quite a lot about. Yeah, I suppose. So basically it's a story about a Westerner whose life is so empty that he has exhausted his ways of getting pleasure because of his lack of imagination, and then he has to turn to a mythical, magical, otherworldly box that will give him like deadly pleasure and eternal torment in hell.
Well,
Good.
Frank does make the notion that the version he had heard about the box was that it was supposed to open gateways either to hell or heaven. Frank himself makes the case that he at the time did not care which one he would end up in. He was simply needing the stronger stimuli so that he was willing to blindly risk either of the two directions. But you kinda could easily believe that Frank's goal here was to end up in heaven. And the short story goes even greater lengths, emphasizing this point since in there Frank actually states it out, or thinks it out in his head that what he was awaiting was some kind of a more extreme form of the same sexual pleasures you get in the normal world, in our society. Frank was expecting to get these oceans of women and was nowhere near expecting what he actually ends up receiving once he opens the box.
About the box, I'm fascinated by the box. It's beautiful, and there is at least one artist that has done a replica according to the specifications of the original artist of the box. And, well, unfortunately and quite obviously, it doesn't have the mechanical functions that you see in the film, where it kind of twists and turns and has separate parts. But I can see that as something that could be achieved. I just haven't found any such mechanical version of the box. That would be even more fascinating. But, you know, just if you're into collecting all kinds of weird shit, then you could go to the puzzleboxmaker.com. And there you have this very detailed replica, and costs about $200.
I have come across a notion that there also are versions of the box which are movable.
Okay.
But they do not have the animatronics or the mechanics built inside of them so that they would move on their own accord like the box does in the film.
Okay. Well, I could see even that happening. I don't know in what way it was actually made in the film, but, you know, a couple of batteries and voila.
Yeah, the problem, I guess, most which would come with that would be once the pieces would kind of have to start to slide and once again close, like they do in film, where the box kind of some of the moving parts in the box shown in the film, in my opinion, move in such of a way, and the pieces are so big when they move that would kind of create a problem with, first off, with the placement of the batteries, but also with any kind of linings that the pieces would have to have so that they could rise up and lower themselves, and also the wiring.
Yeah, I wondered about that, if even the movement of the pieces makes sense in any practical way. Or it looks like there are several versions of the box, obviously, that they use here, and probably very hard to, you know, make a workable one version of the box, if not impossible, in the way that it's represented right here. Well, then we have this kind of a dated effects where the hooks come to the skin of Frank outside of the box. It's kind of looks weird, like like some kind of a plastic. You have made the notion before that it would be chicken skin, but it doesn't look like that to me.
No, now that, you know, once again looking at it closer and looking it at higher definition, this my first copy is the VHS version. Yeah, I guess that I have been wrong in my previous statement, and that would be, I don't know, maybe some kind of a latex which they use.
Could be. Unfortunately, the scream of Frank is a little bit goofy. A bit takes me out of the moment when the scene finishes. You know, like mentioned, the performances are not strong in this film. But still, it's not a big deal considering the overall creativity of this film, with which Roger Ebert vehemently does not agree with. We'll get to that later. But then we got to the house, which will be our center point in this film. We do have some cool special effects. First of Hell, where we are introduced to Pinhead, who's going through his amazing collection of human skin and doing a little puzzle games with the face of a human face. Not sure exactly what happens right there. Like, is it Pinhead playing with the box and then sealing the box once again after killing Frank, I suppose?
He simply closes the box after he has taken Frank with him, as he's supposed to do to anyone who ever manages to open the box. Like, now Frank has opened the box, which summons the Cenobites, and now Frank has been taken to hell as it's supposed to be, and at this point the whole thing has already served its function, so Pinhead just quickly closes the box and leaves the scene.
Unfortunately, the latex or whatever it is, the face pieces on the table do not look like Frank at all, so I never made the connection that this has anything to do with the previous scene where Frank was crying in agony.
Frank's torn up face. This is some part where I'm willing to agree with you when it comes to effects and acting in the film. The effects on Frank's torn up face really ain't that great. They are kind of a honky, and you can very clearly see that.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't bother me. I just always kind of viewed it as some kind of a powerful introduction to the elements that we could see later on in this film. I think there's some kind of specific term for this, but they use it like goddamn truckloads nowadays in films. You have something strong in your opening that doesn't quite make sense, but it will be explained later on in the film to grab the viewer's attention because we are lazy today. You have to put in something that takes you to the world immediately. Then, well, in the book, the guy is called Rory. Yeah.
Yep.
And here he is Larry. Larry and Julia arrived to the house. You might know the history of the house better, but, well, Frank was living there and then he mysteriously... Well, no, Frank was just using the house for his puzzle box purposes at least. And it's some kind of a family house that is now taken into use.
It's Frank's and Larry's mother's house. The mother has disease in some point of time. It's never actually stated when that happens, and it's nowhere important to the story, but yeah, the house belongs to their mother, and there is a small notion being made in the story that Frank has previously used that house as a hiding spot when he has, well, like Larry states out, made one of his remarkable breaks or escapes, hinting that Frank has done some prison time, and there is also the notion to be made that Frank is portrayed as a petty criminal, so it can also has worked as a hideout when Frank has, for example, been hiding from some other underworld contacts that Frank has crossed.
Yeah, I think it's also notable that nobody seemed to have any kind of attention to have like clear, pretty faces in this film. We are actually having like what looks like a middle-aged couple that moves into the house with Julia having this very hideous haircut.
Well, are you against 80s hair?
Yeah, I am. It makes Julia look probably even older than she would otherwise look.
You know, you can't fault the movie for the fact that during that time people used perms.
I just might, because there are plenty of 80s films that try
all with bad hair, may I mention.
Where they're trying to purposefully avoid these fashion hairs of the time, smartly knowing that this will probably be away and out of fashion in a couple of years. But anyway, it's not important. I'm just saying that...
There most definitely is not. Pay no attention to Karri at this point. He's clearly making this up. If something... 80s movies and the hairstyles were purely about perms and mullets.
Yeah, and they went out of fashion in the 90s pretty quickly, so...
So they did. But no way was there during the 80s was there a conscious attempt by anyone to try to avoid the hair trends of that time period.
I don't think so. When I look at some of the higher budget films of 80s, well, just look at your higher end action flicks of the time. I don't think you will find mullets there. You find the mullets if the characters are supposed to be creepy, some kind of criminals and drug users.
Well, Linda Hamilton herself was actually supporting a perm in the original Terminator.
That's true. You'll find them, but it's a low production.
It's still one of the action movies of the 80s.
Julia goes through the photo collection that she finds of Frank having some sexy time with several ladies. Finds herself in the pictures as well. She seems to be at all in no way bothered by the fact, and possibly Julia knew about the habits of Frank, and she just didn't care. So she finds the pictures and destroys at least the one where she's being in. I believe this was not in the book. But it's the perfect way in the film to kind of get the viewer up to speed about the relation of them. Because in the book universe, well, you can explain it with words what's going on, but here you have to kind of, because Julia is alone, you have to somehow visually make the viewer understand what is going on. Then there's the mattress or a cushion that they're trying very hard to get upstairs, seems to be extremely hard and heavy. And Frank is about to hurt his hand to the nail. In between, they have put some exterior shots of the character Kirsty walking around town. But then Kirsty comes inside the house and greets her father. Looks like Kirsty is the most excited one out of the bunch regarding this flat. We're introduced to the fact that Kirsty and Julia are not in the best relations, but Kirsty promises to be nice towards Julia. Too bad that Julia is going through a lot of shit during this film, and that also doesn't help, like, connecting with Kirsty. So she's being a total weirdo throughout this film, Julia. And this was the first feature film of the actor Ashley Laurence playing Kirsty. I just always thought that now that we're coming to the Julia and Frank flashbacks, I never believed the relationship much of Julia and Frank. Because Frank is really a piece of shit and doesn't say much, and Julia is kind of spellbound by the whole character. Already Julia is doing this weird stuff, lurking from the upstairs and not responding to Kirsty. Even before she knows anything about this, Frank the monster has not been introduced yet.
Well, she has just actually gotten the chance to reminiscence the old memories she has of Frank.
I know, but then she gets really all weird all of a sudden. It has such a power on her.
Well, you know, that was the time of sexual liberation for her. The major point of the story is both in film and in the short story is that Julia herself is and has pretty much maybe always been extremely frustrated with Larry. And Frank kind of is the complete opposite of Larry, and that is the thing that actually draws Julia to Frank in the story. That bad boy nature.
Yeah, but it didn't end up in the film.
Well, you do get it in film also. The short story goes more lengths into the connection to a point where in the short story Julia feels the presence of Frank in the house even before, you know, the original spilling of the blood accident. And another difference is that in the original short story, the sexual relationship that Julia and Frank shared was much more brutal in its nature. Julia compares the lovemaking between, or the sexual act between him and Frank all those years ago to a rape in the original short story. In the film, that whole sequence is shown more tender, kind of a more sweet.
Yeah, I mean that they filmed a bunch of stuff, and because of the censor boards, a lot of that had to be left on the cutting room floor. Nobody really seems to know where all that stuff is, because it hasn't surfaced in the special features of the releases of this film.
But then again, I might be wrong here, but I'm under the impression that the only parts that were actually cut from the film were the more graphical scenes of violence.
And I heard about the sex moments as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, could be, of course.
But yeah, then we have the scene where Larry has cut his hand and comes to consult Julia for help in the attic, drops all the blood on the floor in high quantity once again. I can see like people like Roger Ebert and others seeing that this kind of a moment is not extremely original. Yeah, well, if you want to look for that, but for God's sakes, there's more to come that is quite original in the characters of this film. Like, you know, we have seen many times that you spill blood somewhere and that might awaken some kind of a monster. Or you spill something else and it awakens the monster. That's what happens here. But I cannot understand why people cling on to these things so much that they would go to the lengths to say that Hellraiser is not original film.
Yeah, and on that notion, I have never actually seen the rising of the monster done in the same fashion as it is done in Hellraiser. With those images and with that composition of music and images tying together to give you that exact same feel. There have been, of course, attempts to make the return of the monster or the rising of the monster grandiose and epic on its scale, but I think that, Hellraiser does it kind of the best. Like in here, the Franks returning and him growing from the floorboards and forming that basic physical form that he does, combined with Young's soundtrack, really knocks it out of the park and makes that moment feel like this is the moment. This is something great in the film and its universe.
Yeah, it works well. All this reverse played photography and the prosthetics and the goo. So very practical effects. We have something that was and then was in some fashion, I suppose, burned and then played in reverse to give the effect that something is actually rising and getting its body together. And of course it looks exactly like that, but it's well done. What do you think about the Kirsty and her sort of a boyfriend subplot in the film?
In what way do you mean? It is not built that much if that's what you are asking.
It's not built much, but it's necessary for the big rescue in the end, I guess.
Well, yes and no. The big rescue is most anticlimactic at the end, since it still ends up being Kirsty doing all the heavy lifting in the finale of the film. The poor shot just shows up and doesn't do a goddamn thing in the final confrontation.
Seems to have no reaction much whatsoever to the monsters of the underworld, which I thought was kind of hilarious all the time. He seems like he's perfectly fine with these monsters and has exactly the same information acquired as Kirsty at that moment. And
well, he actually doesn't have that much information acquired. Like, he's completely clueless to basically anything that goes on in the film.
Yeah, well, he's supposed to be clueless, but you don't really get that. You get that there's all kinds of supernatural shit happening in the house. Wind blowing and doors smacking and monsters coming from every direction, and then they just smile together and the boyfriend is like, okay, happy times. I think we solved this, but oh, the monster is still coming.
Yeah, but the boyfriend in the end, all he actually gets from the experience is a collapsing house.
And he also sees the monster.
He sees the final monster. I mean, most of the entire confrontation is already taken care of before the boyfriend enters the house. Then he gets a extremely quick look at the butterball Cenobite as the floor collapses on the Cenobite and buries it. And then he runs to the door, opens the door, and that is the only moment where he actually gets a good clear glimpse of any of the monsters of the film.
Yeah, well, also the reaction to the collapsing house is like, okay, I do this every day. Princess saved and let's get out, happy times.
But mostly at that point, they are at the lower level of the house, very close to the door, so I can easily see how his take on that situation would be that, yeah, the princess is saved. Like, all they have to do at that point is get through the door that is right next to them, and they are off the house.
Would you then make the case that these are Oscar-worthy performances right there from the guy?
I don't see a problem in the performance.
Okay, for me it was always kind of the distracting point in the end. Interesting.
Because how would you not be relieved and believe that this is an okay place to crack a smile if you are so sure that you are actually out of the frying pan?
Well, because they are still in the house. And no explanation is given to the guy why the house is collapsing.
Yeah, but then again, you don't need explanation on that point. All you need to know is that the house is collapsing, the girl is inside the house, You got into the girl and the door to outside of the house is right next to you. It's few meters, you just, grab the girl and get out of the door and you are all safe. It's not like there is no a mountain of obstacles between you and the safe space at that moment.
Well, okay. I would not stop to have a little smile and a hug see before I escape the full house, especially because I don't know what the hell is going on.
I, on my end, would milk the hell out of that situation, because that would actually be the prime moment to make yourself look heroic.
More disgusting moments at the attic. There's something rotten on the ground. Suppose leftover skins of Frank and the rats already at that scene, having a fiesta. And we see Frank, formation 1 of Frank the Monster. And, goddammit, the acting of Clare Higgins here is distractingly bad. I mean, Clare Higgins shines when she doesn't have to do anything. Like, she's good at displaying this kind of a distracted woman that has like a past that she wants to stay hidden. But when she's actually pushed to do the high emotion acting, there she doesn't shine to me.
But I never took it as that it's actually supposed to be that high emotion acting.
Well, I mean, you see Frank the Monster for the first time at the attic, you would be screaming your lungs out for sure. And yeah, not convinced. Once again, the voice performances are a little bit wacky. Help me! And especially when Julia comes to the attic for, is it the second time? And Julia's looking for Frank. And apparently Frank is just having some kind of a fun of his own, because he comes near the windows in this fashion. It was like more hilarious than anything else. But these are all memorable moments, for sure. And I enjoy the film. Don't get me wrong, I'm just going to be complaining, as I usually do. Frank needs more blood. He needs more. Which means that Julia has to get some more boys. More guys to spill their blood for Frankie. In the midst of all this, there's this scene in an extremely unromantic location. Is it like a subway station where Kirsty and the boyfriend share a quick kiss?
Something like that, yeah.
There's boyfriend's dream. There's feathers flying around. Somebody's on the table, spilling blood and crying like a baby. And there's a face of some random guy. Is it one of the... No, it's the boyfriend, I guess. That's in 3207 or so.
Yeah, my take was that was supposed to be Larry, who he sees.
Okay. Yeah, well, it looks like an older guy, actually. So
once again, the makeup in that quick shot is maybe not entirely up to par. It suffers the same effect as does Frank's torn up face in the very beginning of the film.
Yeah, once again, not sure if it's important who this is. Never thought about it. It's just some horrifying dream with no special ties to anything.
It gives Kirsty this subliminal feeling that there is something wrong with the situation, even though she at this point has no clue at what it is. Or Kirsty herself at least takes the dream as a notion that something is wrong. Some kind of a hint that everything is not as it should be.
Yeah, and meanwhile Julia is, again, busy to find people to get chopped into pieces. There's this bar scene. One of the very few shots that are filmed somewhere outside of the house. This guy is really creepy. Clearly the movie decides that deserves to be chopped. This guy, I think it's this guy, this victim at 3650 with his underwears now. It's my understanding that they filmed a shot where he was naked, but then the censors said, no, you can't have him naked, so they put some underwear on.
I came across a notion that it was actually the dude himself or the actor who decided that the scene, character-wise, would work better if he would be nude.
Yeah.
In a way, I'm very happy that they did axe that version of the scene.
Yeah, there's some interesting things about the way how US and UK reacted to the censorship aspect of the film, because the UK was extremely terrified about the Julia whacking this guy with the hammer, but the sexuality was okay. And yet again, the other way around for the US authority.
But that is a common contradiction between the more European and US.
Yeah.
Usually the physical and graphical violence is way more okay in US than it is in the rest of the world, and vice versa with the sexuality.
In a way, I'm actually surprised that they managed to punch in one moment of a wobbly penis in this film. I would think
it's purely because everybody missed it.
And we were looking for the scene with Henrik where Frank the Monster does the and it is at 38:54.
So it is.
That's funny.
It is a bit, I must admit.
Or maybe it was like a sound of relief when he got some more skin around his body, like, awesome.
It's hard to say what it actually was meant to be.
Larry comes back home, Julia is moving one of the bodies to the next room. Believe it's never explained what happens to the body. Nobody ever finds it there.
Kirsty comes across one of the bodies at the very end of the film, when it's been simply left rotting in the storage room.
Very true.
But that is one aspect of the film, which also the book shares, that Julia actually never has a clear game plan what to do with the bodies. Both of the film and in the original stories, she simply stores them away, not in any way trying to factor in the fact that, the bodies will start to rot and they will start to smell and they are bound to be found if they stay within the house. There is made the notion that she and Frank intends to leave the house at some point together and go to somewhere, which has never been actually explained what that somewhere is, as it's not important. But still, this is parts where you can clearly see that she and Frank are simply freestyling it as they go on, and they don't have the overall big plan how to make this thing work point by point.
Yeah, this point rather irritated me when watching this film, because they spent so much time at the house, and I think they could have even left the flat earlier on, and I'm not sure why they spent time at the attic.
Frank does get his skin only at the very end of the film.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, obviously they can't live together as long as Frank is as he is.
Still, feels a bit risky to go back to the attic once you actually have some kind of a skin. I'm not sure why you really have to. Well, if you want to hide the murder aspect, then it's a good idea to take the skin of Larry for a second there. But is that meant to be forever? Or what's the master plan with that skin? And why would Julia ever accept that her husband's skin is on Frank? Because she wanted Frank and not Larry version zombie. It gets really weird in the end.
It does get partly weird at the end. Especially since earlier in the film, Julia is protective of Larry and does not want Frank to harm Larry per se. She is against Frank's notions that Frank could simply attack Larry at any point of time. But that is kind of, I guess, simply goes to the hastily made decisions that the pair has to do throughout the story.
Yeah, and then hiding the murder, that makes logical sense, but also comes off as a nice moment and opportunity for Frank to play around, to take the form of Larry. But to go to that length for just that purpose, and then again knowing that you probably are not going to wear that skin all the time, it reeks a bit weird.
It's hard to say was Frank ever intending to keep Larry's skin, but at that point of the story, Frank is incredibly desperate to finally leave the house since he's certain that the Cenobites are after him. and they will start chasing him very soon.
At which point the best course of action is go back to the attic when you have the full skin and go to the place where you were able to do your resurrection to begin with, which just might be not the first idea that I would have to go back there, since that's connected with the Cenobites in a sense.
But then again, to get at least a bit more headway before the police come after you, you kinda have to take care of Kirsty, who is still an eyewitness to the murders. Or is not the eyewitness to the murders per se, but does know what has happened, and does, for example, know about the bodies.
Yep. Julia has a different hairstyle in this one scene at 44:51 when she's holding the glass, and she really looks like evil at this moment, and I think that's the purpose of it as well. I guess I should go into more detail before we are crucified in this podcast, but she does look like somebody who is plotting something very evil at this moment, and Frank is having a tobacco and explains the Cenobites to Julia. Now at this moment Frank is desperate to get rid of Larry, starts making a lot of noise upstairs. They find nothing, and Larry and Julia have a little bit of a not so romantic moment because Frank the monster is behind them. Just some grossness for grossness' sake. Frank cutting the dead rat with the switchblade.
It does kind of showcase the fact that at that point there is no more sources of blood to be found inside the house.
Yeah.
Kind of highlighting Julia at the point that, she better act soon and get more victims inside the house, or Frank is going to attack Larry out of desperation.
Yeah, I guess there are more discreet ways of showing that, but that's one way of doing that.
I mean, then again, did Frank ever give you the impression of being a discreet kind of guy?
No, true in character.
But this does end up being one of the more humanizing scenes for Julia, who at this point kind of is the most outspoken on his desire still to have Larry make it out of the proceedings alive, and most notably goes against Frank and the notion that Frank has made that he could just attack Larry and take blood from Larry.
Yeah, now Kirsty is getting a little suspicious of the proceedings inside the house when she sees Julia inviting a unknown guy inside the house and finally meets Uncle Frank. Gets into possession of the box and throws the box outside of the window. Fucking have it! Perhaps an interesting moment with the nuns outside who just give a quick look at Kirsty but do not assist Kirsty in any way, just let her pass by. Given that I do not know any nuns personally, I'm not sure how this situation would unfold in most of the cases in the reality, but these are some pretty uncaring nuns. Kirsty is taken to the hospital, plays around with the box, because why the hell not, because you already know that that's related to Uncle Frank and just reeks of disaster, this whole item. But, the best course of action is to smile and keep fondling the box, open it, because that's just what you do.
The box at that point is the best clue kind of to try to understand what the hell is overall going on.
That it might be. And this is the most Hellbound Hellraiser 2-ish moment of the film when the wall of the hospital opens up and we get a look of this particular monster. You probably remember the name of the monster.
The Engineer.
The Engineer.
Which was actually the name of Pinhead in the original short story.
Uh-huh.
As far as I've been made to kind of piece these names and characters together. And in here they have named this unknown monster who appears only in this film as the Engineer.
Yeah. This took a very long time to film, and it was really complicated to shoot for them. And you can still see, well, I'm not sure if you can see some of the crew behind, but you can definitely see the device that is used to push the Engineer towards Kirsty at some points.
You can see it partly during the chase scene. Especially now on the DVD and Blu-ray releases.
Yeah.
In the original VHS, I remember that you couldn't make out the rig that they used to push the latex monster around.
Yeah.
Just goes to show you that in the end VHS is the supreme format for movie experiences.
So what are the experiences when you go to the theater? Lesser experiences?
It is the experiences where you can actually see the little goofs and the rigs that are being used to push around the monsters you use.
Yeah, I give it to you that there perhaps were more aura of mystery to a film because you couldn't see so much with the VHS.
Yeah,
but it's not a good argument though to watch VHS.
It most definitely is a good argument to watch VHS. Tense moments are more tense if viewed on a VHS tape.
Yeah, well, it helps to make it harder to figure out what is going on because half of the picture is missing.
That also. But there are moments when VHS's lower image quality and the fact that part of the image is missing. In my opinion, there are films where it has actually helped the overall feel and the uneasiness you feel as you watch the film.
Yeah, now the rest of the Cenobites appear, things get all weird. I like the shot which looks like a inverted color shot where the bricks look black and in between you have light. And lots of creativity went into these characters, for sure, and for some reason they keep changing these characters. Along the Hellraiser series, I cannot understand why they couldn't at least keep the same Cenobites in the goddamn films. They can't even do that. And unfortunately, they weren't able to keep the same actors. For example, I have to mention the woman Cenobite in this film, which I'm sorely missing in the sequels because she just looks absolutely excellent in the film.
She does. I'm also a huge fan of the Chatter Cenobite, which also was dropped out of the franchise after the second one.
Yeah.
It is, in my opinion, a crying shame that they didn't use the same Cenobites in the later installments, except Pinhead. In a way, I can kind of understand it, in a producer kind of a perspective, that you need to churn out more monsters for the hungry masses that they can oogle at as they stuff their mouths full of popcorn. But at the same time, there is something I feel special in the original 4 Cenobites that is kind of lacking in the later ones that appear throughout the franchise. There is this aspect of systematic and calculated violence that has been done to them. In a way how, for example, Pinhead's face, every line, every cut has been measured so that they are equal in length and equal in depth. Every, pin has carefully been put on its place. And it does showcase to you that there has been a systematic consciousness behind each cut. And there has been a clear intent. Like whatever has done that to Pinhead has known precisely what it is doing during the proceedings and how to do it. And that intent and that systematic nature of the violence, I think, is something that was lost in the later Cenobite designs.
Yeah, there's less details that I see in the Cenobites in the sequels, definitely, at least from the part 4 onwards.
There is in my opinion, the violence that has been done to them appears more aggressive in its nature. In Hellraiser 3, for example, you have that one Cenobite who is a cameraman for the news group. And he has the camera kind of stuffed through his head. And that, as an act of violence, is kind of an extremely aggressive one. Like that is taking the first instrument you get and just hitting it through someone's head. It's very aggressive notion. And contrasted that to, for example, Pinhead, who has clearly been cut in extremely careful and extremely measured way. Like, there you see someone who has taken its time to inflict that violence.
Yeah.
You don't see that in a Cenobite who simply has a camera stuck through his head, or who has, CD discs simply, stuck into his head.
Even though I loved both of the characters in their absurdity.
Yeah, I really do not support them.
Yeah, I can see that.
There are better Cenobite designs in some parts of the franchise. I give it that much. And some of the later designs kind of, at least partly, get back into the notion of how the Cenobites were here, but I kind of feel that they were most systematically designed in the first two, or in the case of these original 4 Cenobites.
Kirsty makes a deal with the Cenobites, letting them know that their old friend Frank Cotton has indeed escaped. It's an interesting scene in the sense that Pinhead has the legendary line, "We will tear your soul apart." And in the acting you can see that, in a way, he's showing his anger, but in a way he's also holding it back. Like he was instructed to, like the Cenobites were instructed to. That they are just the messengers of pain, not supposed to show emotion.
Yeah, to me they have always been kind of a municipal workers of hell. Like your average government official. Someone who stays behind the desk and stamps the envelopes. Or makes the same goddamn boring decisions every goddamn day and fills in the paperwork.
Yeah, that's a good one.
The way how they act, how they precisely lack a clear aggression in the way how they speak, how they clearly does not have emotion or strong emotion behind their acts, and their role as simply as someone who is supposed to get to you or come to get to you if you open the box and summon them and take you with them to hell and then close the doorway or close the box. After that, it kind of gives me that feeling of them simply being kind of like hell's rubber stamp.
Yeah, that's kind of what sets the Cenobites apart from many other horror characters, is the sense that you don't get the emotion.
Very much so, because typically your horror villain is precisely that. He's a villain, he's a monster, he's someone who is very aggressive. Freddy Krueger takes sadistic pleasure on the violence that he creates. He clearly enjoys cutting up people and he uses clear force. Like, he has emotion when he hurts someone. And that is a kind of a running theme behind these horror movie monsters. And that is something that is lacking of the Cenobites. Instead, that is something that you get in Frank, in Hellraiser. In every way and mean, Frank is more... He's basically the monster and the villain in Hellraiser. And the Cenobites themselves are not. And I've always liked that aspect in the first 2 Hellraisers. And that is something that really pisses me off to no end in Hellraiser 3, The Hell on Earth, where they completely drop the ball and once again make Pinhead just your typical horror movie villain who wants to come to Earth, who has the drive to actually come to Earth, and has the drive to hurt people and is all about souls, 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 I want souls. For no good goddamn reason.
Yeah, it's amazing that we get Doc Bradley to so many of the sequels. I understand it was kind of a labor of love, because it was his first movie and it seems he wanted to keep himself in the part.
That is very much taking one for the team several goddamn times.
Yeah, but even he had to face the fact later on that when he did take a look at one of the scripts that was for the new Hellraiser film, he just had to say to himself that, okay, this is shit, I'm out. There are limits to the hells that you have to go through in filmmaking.
Poor Doc sure as hell stuck with the franchise way more longer than was humanly required of him.
Yeah, I wonder if he would come back for the remake. I guess that doesn't make any sense. But there's been a remake in the makings for several years, but it has been unable to get off the ground really because what I could find was that many people who were involved in the project just could not stomach the fact that they would be making like a teenage slasher film bearing the name Hellraiser. They wanted to put it to the rated R category, go all the way because it's the Hellraiser, and many of them did want the official stamp of approval from Clive Barker himself. And without that approval, they would not have gone ahead. And many of them have been true to their words, and then they were laid off the project because of artistic differences or whatever the case was.
Well, when it comes to the Hellraiser remakes, which have they now been going around like 14 years trying to get the project off the ground. It is a curious case of every now and then someone getting extremely excited about the possibility and then it coming to a dead end because of the artistic differences. Something I really haven't been able to understand is the production company's kind of a interest in having these French extreme horror directors like Pascal Laugier tied to the project, who, judging by their previous films, would be precisely right or could potentially be extremely right to make a Hellraiser remake, but at the same time are way too graphical, way too violent in their films to ever satisfy a production company that wants to make somehow a film that can be marketed to teenagers.
And so we were supposed to discuss, I guess, deeper into the fact that Frank has taken the appearance of Larry. It is a little bit weird, but it's some kind of a temporary SIG game just to play with Kirsty. That's my take on it, because it doesn't serve any other function except for the fact that it gives them a getaway plan outside of the house without anyone noticing what the hell is going on. Except, of course, Frank goes to great lengths to show the Kirsty that he's not really Larry, he's actually Frank, Uncle Frank, you remember me. And therefore, the plan is to kill Kirsty, right?
Pretty much, yeah. The decision to take Larry's skin at this point is, in my opinion, it's pure act of desperation. Like, now Frank can no longer wait and he simply has to take the first skin he can get his hands on. But it does kind of a cinematic and thematically it does alone a lot to the scenes with Frank and Kirsty, because what you have here thematically when they interact between each other is Frank wearing Kirsty's father's skin. And for example, the notion that Frank makes, "come to daddy," it kind of has that extra layer on it. It is a bit more sick because Frank is wearing Kirsty's daddy at that moment. I like that twistedness.
Yeah, and like a standout performance from Andrew Robinson, I would choose him as said, like the best performance of this film, where of course he has the added benefit that he has these kind of two roles to play here. But yeah, Andrew Robinson was into the idea and did a great job. It's kind of ridiculous, of course, to take the appearance of somebody else and is wearing the kind of the dead skin of someone else on his face for this situation, but it's believable enough.
Wearing someone else's skin is go-to solution in horror medium. Like, this is not the first time that this stunt has been pulled off by the villain of a horror story. Leatherface comes to mind as someone who precisely made a huge point about wearing someone else's skin, and there is also, if I remember correctly, was there a Junji Ito's horror story where bad guys, they had lost their own skin and they were preserving their own skins and wearing those skins as they walked outside of their own home, kind of to give it the appearance to everybody else that everything is normal, but once they were inside they took their skins off.
Yeah, the "come to daddy" is one of the most remembered lines of this film. There's of course plenty more. But one brilliant thing that was left on the screen was the moment when Frank's and Larry's skin is being torn apart. And Frank makes the line, Jesus wept. And originally, as you might know of Henrik, the line was, fuck you. But the actor Andrew Robinson thought it was kind of banal to use at this moment, and he went straight into the Bible and the Sunday schools and came up with this iconic horror line. Props for him for that.
Most definitely props for him for that.
Yeah. And this of course is remembered along with the legendary lines such as, we have such sights to show you, and the beginning and the ending line of the film, what's your pleasure, sir? But yeah, so Kirsty fights the Cenobites. There's kind of a hilarious moment where Frank is somehow unable to find Kirsty for one moment, and Kirsty goes in a very noisy fashion to cry to the hallway and then is immediately found by Frank. Escapes Frank's switchblade long enough that Frank is now captured and taken into the chains of the Cenobites. And my favorite scene of this film is now there, when Kirsty is playing with the box trying to get it to the basic form, at which time Pinhead raises from behind of Kirsty and says, we have such sights to show you. It's the most hellish moment of this film for me, with of course complemented by the Christopher Young's extremely good soundtrack and the so-called hell spells in the background. You know, the special effects are rather dated, Henrik.
That they unfortunately are. I must confess to that much.
Yeah.
As much as I like the ending of the film, the fact is that the yellow light that kind of burst out of the Cenobites as Kirsty closes the box is pretty dated at this point.
Yeah. I mean, all the kind of lightning effects in this film seem a little bit weak, even for the time. Of course, the budget was kind of low, 1 million, and which is about a little over 2 million in today's value. So, kind of low budget.
Very low budget, and
I don't know if there's anything that really is still standing out today. I mean, the prosthetics are kind of quirky and kind of as outdated as the lighting effects. But no, it's not a big deal. It's kind of a part of the spirit of the film.
It is, and to the film's defense, I don't know what would be the best way to actually showcase what is happening. Like the banishment of the Cenobites. How would you make it effect-wise? It's not the most easiest concepts to kind of create on a film. It's not like, for example, stabbing someone with an extremely large knife or hitting someone in the head with a hammer, which is extremely kind of easy to grasp what you have to do. But banishing someone back to hell by forcibly closing a gateway, that's kind of harder to visualize or imagine how to visualize it.
Yeah, no biggies. But we have Henrik completely skipped over the homeless guy who likes to eat bugs. We see him in the middle moments of the film, and then he returns with a vengeance to the final scene, where we see the actually quite impressive dragon that flies away, and the movie then completes. I like the dragon.
I like it too. I also liked kind of the concept of the homeless guy as this protector of the box. Someone who once is supposed to keep a distant eye of it, and if time be, make sure that it is retrieved and bring back to the original seller.
And funny how the memory goes in the head that you would see the dragon actually flying, but we actually never see the dragon flying. We just see him being kind of pissed off around the flames, and then we see a camera flying away from the main characters, and goodbye.
It does show the strength when film strongly implies that something does happen.
Yeah, good example. What's your pleasure, Henrik?
I would guess that it would be the feminist imagery during the ending of the film, when Kirsty banishes the Cenobites by closing the box.
Do we have something to say about the most hellish experiences in our life in this podcast?
Well, you are free to make any confessions you want.
Well, I thought about it, but I couldn't come up with anything that's spectacular, but in my youth there have been moments where I have thought that I've been close to death, for example. Once I was in the middle of the night with my friends when we were like 14 or 15 in the middle of this huge bridge, and we were crossing it, and on the other side of the bridge there are this bunch of young hooligan looking what appear to be like a drug users. They are crossing the paths of me and my friend, and they start beating up my friend. We survived the situation, nothing then much happened except the kicking of my friend and him losing all his money. And also on one occasion I was in Poland, so more recent times, waiting for my kebab, while this other guy behind us is starting to get irritated by the fact that we speak Finnish. And then he says that, what are you talking about, me or Poland? And he gets really irritated and shows us his knife, that if you speak any shit about me or Poland, then you're going to get knifed, basically. Fortunately enough, the girlfriend of this guy had more brains than the guy and was able to convince his wonderful boyfriend to leave the kebab line and go do some other activities.
There certainly is something with you and people stuffing knives at your face.
Yeah, seems like it. Those are probably the highlights. I haven't been able to get closer to Pinhead than that. You have spent your fair share of time in Rovaniemi though. Well, I'm surprised if you haven't come across some kind of a drug-fueled moments. That's the reputation of Rovaniemi.
Well, of course, during the years I have had my shared number of close calls and almost biting it. But I don't know, none of those instances have kind of stayed with me as a hellish moment per se. Those moments, of course, have been pretty intense and at that time not at all pleasant, but after that moment has passed, I kind of am not feeling them anymore in such of a negative light as to describe them as hellish moments.
Well, they were hellish moments at the time, but that was the point, not how they feel now.
Yeah, well, in that sense, yeah, sure, there has been, close calls. Moments where the situations of making a film podcast were nowhere in the near future, so to speak.
Yeah, you couldn't get your therapy session. Right here, on the Flick Lab. Premiere and box office. Budget was somewhere between 900,000 and 1 million of that time. Of that time's currency, inflation adjusted for 2019, it would be 2.13 million. Gross in USA was 14.5 million. Inflation adjusted, it's something like 30 million. Roger Ebert fucking hated this film, gave it only half stars. The key quote was from his review the following. I have seen the future of implausible plotting, and his name is Clive Barker. Who goes to see movies like this? What do they get out of them? I like good horror movies because I enjoy being surprised and sometimes even moved. But there are no surprises in Hellraiser, only dreary series of scenes that repeat each other. What fun is it watching the movie mark time until the characters discover the obvious? This is a movie without wit, style or reason, and the true horror is that actors were made to portray and technicians to realize its bankruptcy of imagination. End quote, Henrik. So, you wanna go first?
Well, there really is. I mean, it is the man's opinion, so I'm not really. Like, everyone is started in their opinion, even in the wrong ones. Kind of more interesting than Ebert not liking a horror film is the fact that Ebert kind of made himself out to be the arch nemesis of Barker through the later years.
Yeah, I myself am not like the biggest fan of Hellraiser, and as said, I actually remember looking down on Hellraiser, and I really didn't think it was much worth of my time. But now when I'm older, I've found much more value, and if anything, there's no bankruptcy of imagination, or on the extreme contrary. Once again, Roger Ebert, I can't understand this guy. It's his opinion, but obviously there is creativity in this film, so I don't know what the hell he's even talking about.
Ebert famously has had a problem with films which he has felt are too cynical and not happy enough. That is the argument that Ebert has more times than once brought up when discussing especially horror films.
I guess he would be the biggest fan of Halloween 2 from 2009, going by that fact. But I mean, sure, there's a lot of tropes here, as mentioned, like some kind of a trigger, like blood, in this case awakening the monster, but in the minimum sense, you just have to admit the creativity is on the table that was put into creating the Cenobites. It comes across as totally disingenuous to claim Hellraiser lacks creativity, but hey, I guess it depends on what kind of artistic experiences you're coming from. I mean, maybe Ebert had seen pinhead type of characters in like hundreds of films before Hellraiser, but I seriously doubt that.
I more believe that it is simply the kind of the more cynical nature of the film, which once again was the fact that Barker Ebert.
Yeah, well, why not find the artistic merits in that as well?
Yeah, but the kind of the notion, and this is something that, you know, I've run across in Ebert's, especially some of the letter exchange that he has had with film creators. For example, this extremely shitty and poor quality independent horror film Chaos, which Ebert hated from the bottom of his heart, but he had an exchange with the director after his review, and from that it kind of became clear that Ebert likes films from which he can exist with a happy feeling. Like, he likes films where the last feelings you get are of hopefulness and happiness. He does not like films which leave you with a downer feeling.
Yeah, it's a common problem for many critics that are seen as the critics that you should follow, the big ones. I feel like they look down on films that show some gross aspects and look up on films that are beautiful. But when it comes to this review of Roger Ebert, his review again had many factual errors, so I'm not even so sure he saw the same movie that we did. Like, looking at it now during the internet age, it is downright kind of... It's a bit embarrassing how much he shows he was not paying attention during this film. Well, the dialogue of this film, I think it ranges from brilliant to banal, or not so well executed. It's kind of a mixed bag. But yeah, I enjoy it. Cinematography, beautiful, very creative, if at that, theatrically tacky by today's standards. You know, when you look at the execution, when the Cenobites for the first time appear, you have this light oozing from behind the building, and then the light is being put against the Cenobites. The whole kind of reveal is kind of slow and looks kind of technical. But we have to remember this was relatively low budget film, and there's only that much you can fuck around with the sets and the lighting, also time-wise, because it's a complicated scene. But no, I enjoy it. It just looks a little... It looks like they didn't have enough time to make it more smooth. I know, but I should really shut the fuck up because I enjoy it. Release versions. Released on Blu-ray by Anchor Bay already in 2009. But then Arrow Films re-released an improved 2K transfer in 2015. And there's a bunch of different audio tracks for this film with varying quality levels. So about the different versions or deleted scenes, the film first received an X rating and then had to return to the cutting room floor. These scenes were cut. There's 2.5 shots were excised from the first hammer murder, including a close-up of the hammer lodged into the victim's head. There's Julia murdering one man. The actor playing the victim wanted to be naked because it made sense to him, so the nude murder was shot but ultimately cut. There's close-ups of Kirsty sticking hand into Frank's stomach, and this reveals the guts. There's a longer version of the scene where Frank is being torn into pieces by the Cenobites' hooks. And in the final shot, where the head explodes and brain is splattered all around. And then there was the more explicit Julia Frank scene with plenty of spanking, but the MPAA would have been okay with 2 spanks, but 3 was then considered obscene. Seems kind of they don't even know where to set the limits. They're just pulling it as they go. Or, maybe perhaps there's like a spanking guideline book lying somewhere in the corner of MPAA offices from 1987, and this is how much spanking you can have in one scene or in one film.
Spanking in any movie is a precise science, as it turns out.
As is head hammering.
As is head hammering. I'm actually more surprised that head hammering was touched upon by the board. I was kind of expecting that the spanking was to be left out, but graphical violence.
Yeah, I guess the hammering had more to do with the certain close-up where the hammer was punched into his head clearly. But
most likely, yeah.
But then again, like Friday the 13th, ring any bells? Well, of course, we're talking about the UK authorities here now, so...
Yeah, should have simply tried to get out of the gates in the US in the first place, and after that bring it to UK.
Yeah, but then there would not be wobbly penises, I guess.
Yeah, it's a win-some, lose-some situation.
How's the Legacy of Hellraiser? Well, it's one of the more inventive horror films, along with Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Exorcist. Wouldn't call Friday the 13th very original, but it's one of the more successful and one of the more known and well-remarked horror franchises, or horror stories, rather. One of the classics.
Just a crying shame that the overall legacy at this point is pretty badly damaged by every other film that came after the second one.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell they were smoking. Was it marijuana or ass of an octopus? But you have 9 sequels so far, and they could have just at least gotten some directors who would have respect for the original vision of Clive Barker, and get some of the same feeling back into the sequels. But as you see in the sequels, you know that they are really tormenting these characters.
Then again, I don't know, maybe the curse of Hellraiser was that the original ideas and the original themes behind the film were kind of so untypical, so new and so big that no one else later on could fully comprehend or grasp them. And that would explain why immediately after Barker left Hellraiser franchise, the next thing that they do is they make Pinhead act and operate just like, well, your typical horror movie villain.
Yeah, at least when Doug Bradley left the franchise, then you start to see these people who replace him. There's at least one of those sequels where you see in the trailer already and in the still shots that they have completely lost the essence of the character, in the sense that you have a Pinhead who seems to be extremely angry, showing emotions, which you haven't seen, at least in these original films with Doug Bradley. So it seems they are losing sense of their characters completely and utterly.
Then again, to everyone's defense, going by some of the later outings of Barker himself in the franchise, not having read the latest 2 books, but some of the comics of where Barker himself has been penning out the story, I kind of feel that even Barker has lost the main points of Hellraiser as the time have gone on, to a point where the hell of Hellraiser has, in my opinion, it has started to look more like a Christian version of hell. And the Christian imagery has kind of taken a larger foothold in the way how the hell is being envisioned. And also, in my opinion, Pinhead himself as a character has started to make plans and have plans that are in motion. Throughout all this, he also starts to have a personal stake at the proceedings, and he also starts to have more opinions and feelings about situations. He's not so much emotionally outsider of what happens.
Yeah, at this point I'm kind of even astonished that Clive Barker would even care about making anything related to Hellraiser series, at least in the movie sphere. Last that I'm aware of Barker being involved in this, Barker himself wrote the remake script many years ago and delivered it to the studio who knows how long time ago, but nothing has materialized on the screen since. But except, of course, one of the straight-to-DVD or straight-to-video Hellraisers, so it's hard to understand what is going on here.
The first guess would be that Hellraiser still, for Barker himself, is the most well-known franchise that he still has under his name.
Of course, and the monetary benefits.
Yeah, and something that fans would keep pestering him on. And maybe that kind of explains why Barker still feels that he likes to return to Hellraiser to tell more stories in that universe, either in comics or in book form. I kind of feel that I myself hope that Barker himself would also just walk away from Hellraiser at this point. Seeing some of the latest comic run, which Barker himself was involved, I don't anymore see Barker himself being fully at the reins of his original concepts in Hellraiser mythos. I kind of get the notion that Barker himself also has lost it.
Quickies. Favorite performance?
I'm extremely split on the middle here. Unlike you, I liked the performances in Hellraiser. I did not have a problem with any of the actors. I kind of liked how low-key their performances were.
I mean, in a way, it doesn't really bother me because there's a lot to like in the film. But if I would personally go looking for the best performance, then Andrew Robinson would be my pick.
I guess I would also go with Robinson. I am extremely tempted, of course, to give it to Doug Bradley, who I also feel makes spectacular work as Pinhead. But Andrew Robinson's character in the film gives him more range where to play performance-wise. And Robinson does take advantage of those moments. It's kind of an unfair comparison because where Robinson can basically play two characters, and at the later half of the film he can go all in portrayal of Frank and have that what Frank was despicable. Despicable moments. Bradley has to keep his role extremely low-key and make sure that he gives the least amount of emotion at any scene. But yeah, if you have to pick one, the Robinson has the most range. What he does in the film is despicable.
Yeah, Doug Bradley delivers Pinhead right here, right now. But if I would go the nitpicky route, I would say that Doug Bradley's performance here is a little bit shaky when compared to the other performances later in the series when he does Pinhead. But yeah, I mean, I enjoy it thoroughly. It's a tricky situation in your first film with having such of a amount of makeup and having a weird role where you have to be kind of pushing yourself to, you're trying to avoid the emotions when doing the performance. You're limiting yourself as an actor.
And I've come to understand that actually is a hell of a hard task for an actor to pull off.
Yeah, so I heard. Favorite scene, Henrik?
I guess it would be that moment when Frank first comes together at the attic room.
I would say when Pinhead, as already mentioned by me, appears and races from behind of Kirsty near the end, and then Christopher Young's hellish notes play and Pinhead says the eternal lines. We have such sights to show you. I get chills down my spine every time.
Same thing here.
The scariest moment of this film for me. Favorite quote. Or in other words, favorite quote.
This is surprisingly quotable movie. Especially thanks to Pinhead's lines, which are pure quote, but...
Yeah.
I guess I still would pick Jesus wept.
Yep, it could have been that almost as well. But I will just go back to "We have such sights to show you." Favorite kill?
Frank, take 2.
Yeah, Frank, of course, when he's pulled into pieces.
For the second time.
Yeah, Jesus wept.
As graphical as this film gets, that is the high point when it comes to the graphical violence here in Hellraiser.
It is, and that brings us to first image that comes to mind. And this one is not very hard to think through. For me, it would be Jesus wept scene.
On my end, it would be the 4 Cenobites coming together in the hospital.
Yeah. Well, which image best exemplifies this film? What would Henrik put in a poster art for this film if you got free hands? Or something to that effect?
I guess I would go with the actual image that they use in the poster, which is Pinhead holding the box.
Okay, and if we forget the posters, what image best exemplifies the film? For me, I would probably go with Frank sitting legs crossed amongst the candles and playing with the puzzle box.
I guess I would take the image of the Cenobites in the attic room when they have that small group shot.
Yeah. What took you out?
Actually, nothing took me out of the film. I was pleasantly surprised how well paced this film is even today. Like when watching this film, rewatching this film once more for the episode, and having seen the film for a number of times before, I once again met that moment when I was sure that I've just watched a couple of scenes of the film and I just put the DVD on the player and then I quickly paused it to grab myself a next cup of coffee and noticed that it had been running for 45 minutes already.
Yeah, for me, there's nothing really new that I haven't really already said before, but there are some performance issues here with Kirsty played by Ashley Laurence and Frank played by Sean Chapman, in my opinion, delivered unfortunately the least believable performances. I know that Sean Chapman was doing a certain thing here and it was a really aware choice of what he's doing right here, this minimal performance thing, but it's a little too theatrical. Not that it would be a big problem once again. But what pulled us in to the world of Hellraiser? Well, for me, the Cenobites almost pulled me to hell, so I'll go with that.
To me, during the first time seeing this film, the moment where I really kind of was put in very first time, when I first time realized that this is something completely different, was at the very beginning of the film when, after Frank has been torn apart for the first time, and there is that lingering shot at the attic with Pinhead and the other Cenobites kind of appearing to the image. And to this day, that still is kind of the moment when I actually remember that I'm actually watching Hellraiser at the moment.
Yeah. Scissors of Sacrilege. What would you sacrilegiously change in the film?
I actually would leave it as it is.
Yeah, there is nothing that I would find interesting cutting as well or altering. Nothing really. Well, of course, now we could play around and improve the special effects, but that's not really... That would be kind of, but I don't feel that would be a fair jab to take at this portion. Yeah, no. Did we look at our Rolexes? Nope. Henrik, would you recommend Hellraiser?
I actually most definitely would recommend. It is an interesting take on horror film. It's an interesting take on your typical expectations of a horror film monsters. And in my opinion, it's very hopeful film at the very end of it. So, most definitely, yeah, check Hellraiser.
Yep, please do. I think the idea, the concept and, especially the memory that you have of the visuals afterwards is even better than what you really end up seeing special effects wise on the screen. But, yep, definitely catch Hellraiser. It's one of the more inventing horror films out there in the 80s and in general, especially during the times when most of the horror films were doing the same tropes over and over again. And Henrik, we have a bunch of creepy, made up Cenobites in the attic with costumes made of supposedly leather, being very gothic. And I don't know exactly if this is a good bridge and whatever it might have to do with homosexuality, but please try your best. There was some notion that you wanted to make about gay Razor.
I detest the word you are using here at the moment.
It's the word of your choosing for your document.
It most definitely is not. There is no Word document of that name.
As noted before, in the book you have this starting scene with Frank surrounded by the candles, and there's some bodily fluids flying into every direction with this orgasmic moment as mentioned before. And this brings us to, I guess, in a sense, to the sexuality of Clive Barker. And he's a homosexual, and you're arguing tonight that there are some very deep, even, underlying messages of homosexuality in the film, which it never even crossed my mind. But I'm not saying that there aren't, so let's hear it.
To be honest, yeah, I too myself am not the most versatile on the subject. The first notion I guess I have to, of course, make before we proceed any further is that, in case it hasn't been obvious, in the podcast before this, I myself am extremely straight person.
Just so we get it out of the way.
Just so we get it out of the way. I am insecure. So in that sense, I personally might not be the most qualified person to touch upon the subject. But some time ago, I did come across, and this is something where I have to give out a shout out to YouTube channel Cook Philosophy, who actually first time brought into my notion that when it comes to Clive Barker's works, especially his films, there is a debate going on whatever or not Clive Barker's films qualified as gay cinema. And usually the first arguments that are brought up in the debate, to my understanding, is that they obviously are, since Barker himself is a openly gay author. And also the fact that in a lot of his films there are scenes which I very well can believe would be pleasing for a gay man's eyes. Like, for example, in Hellraiser we have Frank in his black leather jacket, all wet from the rain. And later on, this is an image which is kind of repeated in, for example, Nightbreed.
Well, if I can interrupt in the sense, just to point out that I don't see any connection between leather and homosexuality unless you're kind of looking to make the connection via the subculture with leather that is associated with gays and Tom of Finland type of art, which, well, you could make connection of leather with many other things as well.
I'm not so much making connection with leather, even though, as you pointed out, Tom of Finland, imagery of course would be a go-to resort on the matter, but what I was aiming more at was the fact that Barker shows you a muscular male body with leather jacket, and well, in a way, or I myself could very easily believe that, the male figure Barker shows in his films could be pleasing for gay eyes.
Are you saying Pinhead is muscular? I never made that notion.
I'm saying that Frank is muscular.
Okay, well,
to make it more obvious what I'm throwing at, if you would switch Frank in the scene where he comes to Julia's front door in the rain, if you would switch Frank with, let's say, 28 to 35 slim brunette with the white t-shirt, with the leather jacket, I could have a raging hard on.
I don't know, well, it feels a little bit forced connection from the YouTube channel to make, but I can see where this is going.
Yeah, and to YouTube channel's defense, it's not their connection. This is me.
Okay.
Pure and simple.
So because we have a muscular guy who kind of looks like a Tom of Finland character, and there are people or characters who wear leather, this kind of sums up as being gay.
No, the argument I've run across is more that a gay audience could find the men Barker casts in his films sexually pleasing.
But why? Why? It could be any other type of guy as well.
Well, yeah, but I guess it's more than any large reason, it more just comes to a figure or a body which you find pleasing.
Yeah, or pleasing for Julia.
Yeah, or pleasing for Julia, but this is kind of the opposite of, for example, a Bond girl in James Bond films, where the Bond girl is obviously casted for the male audiences, to be sexually pleasing for the male gaze. And I kind of see the point that similar fashion, like a Bond girl would be, and well, or more often than not, I guess, are sexually pleasing for a straight man's perspective, a male figure can be sexually pleasing for a gay man's perspective.
Yeah, well, we're kind of getting to the territory where I'm uncomfortable, not because of the gay stuff, but because of questioning the appeal of some characters. For example, I would guess that the Julia character is not very appealing to a straight guy, or I don't think she is meant to be as a very appealing or sexually appealing character here.
I don't know.
Does she do something for you?
Not me particularly, no. But, well, for example, you know, that one scene where she looks like the evil witch of the north, as you pointed out, I could see someone else having a raging hard on.
Like,
I have friends who could like that sort of thing. Not me personally, of course.
Of course not.
Of course not.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah. Basically, the whole point is besides the argument. Like, I'm merely, at this point, I'm merely laying the groundwork for what is going on behind the scenes of Barker's films about whether or not do they qualify as gay cinema.
Yeah. Well, if we're going to argue about sex appeal, I guess more attention to that is paid in the male character in this film. But I'm not the most best to kind of quantify that.
Well, I guess neither one of us are, since whatever actually floats your boat, so to speak, is very personal.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter, okay, we have muscles, we have like maybe poses or clothing that makes the character a little bit more appealing than without that. So
yeah, and that combined with Barker's own open homosexuality is the go-to kind of argument why Barker's films should be counted in as gay cinema. And the counter-argument to that point, the first counter-argument, most typical counter-argument, is that they do not qualify as gay cinema because there is no open gay presentation in his films. His written stories, some of them have openly gay characters, but his films most definitely do not have a character who is stated homosexual. And this is usually the reasoning behind, the counter-argument. Barker's films ain't gay cinema, and they don't have a gay presentation because there is no openly gay character in them.
Yeah, well, it's not surprising that if you have somebody who is gay, that you're going to have different perspectives on characters, and I don't think it's more complicated than that. And I'm not sure if that in itself still qualifies as gay cinema, but you have some more ammo in your pocket, so...
Yeah, I'm merely, I'm trying to be nuanced here. tiptoeing around the subject, because as a straight man, once again, this is kind of one of those situations. Should you or should you not touch this whole thing with a 10-inch pole? Because there lies the danger that the straight guy ends up explaining to gay persons what is and what is not gay presentation in films. And I'm trying to avoid doing that mistake as hard as I can. And because of that, I'm trying to basically talk about anything else but the subject matter at hand itself.
Yeah, it's maybe better to not talk about polls when discussing these topics.
Says the man who extremely largely built around the holes of a plot variety.
It just happens naturally. Haha.
But yeah, like that is the argument, and that is not something that the debate is not something that I myself found out. It was something that was pointed out to me by the YouTube channel, and I kind of got my first bearings on even understanding the subject from Cook philosophy. Do not try to claim ownership on the findings of others, that needs to be pointed out. But from that standpoint, like discussed, Barker himself was born 52. He was something like 18 when he first identified himself as gay, so that would be somewhere around 1970s. And that most notably was not a very good time in itself for gay population worldwide at all. The UK had decriminalized male-on-male gay sex, was it 1967? And even that came with some caveats, because the underlying theme was that it is allowed as long as no third party in any way is subjugated for the sexual intercourse between two males, which basically laid the entire responsibility of making sure that no straight person in any way comes into contact with anything that might have any resemblance to gay sex purely on the gay population. And, for example, prohibited homosexual intercourse between two males in hotel rooms. And even that was kind of a huge push for more accepting attitudes in Britain, because before that, homosexuals were first allowed to be hanged as deviants and later on either be imprisoned or chemically castrated. And even though the attitudes towards homosexuality kind of worldwide was technically becoming more okay worldwide, there still was very underlying attitudes against gay population, which kind of, I guess, highlighted in the 1980s AIDS crisis, during which many prominent political figures openly made the statement that, well, the AIDS crisis is the fault of gays themselves and they deserve it as a godly punishment for being sexual deviants. I'm bringing all this out because that is the societal atmosphere where Hellbound Heart was written, and kind of also the place where Hellraiser as a film originated from. So there were kind of both in Britain and in US, there were very hard attitudes against gay population, even though it was technically now legally allowed to be a gay man. It still was not allowed societally.
And so the best way to showcase that sexual frustration is to write a novel where a guy is sperming around in the attic.
Not maybe that. When it comes to sperming in the attic, I'm kind of accounting that as the fault of the splatterpunk genre. Like when you write splatterpunk, you have to shoehorn the sex in there somehow.
But what are the other points?
I would argue that the Cenobites themselves are a form of gay presentation in Hellraiser.
I don't really see anything sexual about them.
Not sexual. Not in a sexual way. No. But I'm more looking from a societal standpoint. Like, approaching them from the standpoint of the quote-unquote other. Someone who is not part of the organism that is the surrounding society. Kind of like a gay population being pushed to the sidelines of the society. It's okay to hang them, it's okay to imprison them, and it's okay that they die in the hands of AIDS.
Yeah, I understand that notion, but once again, if I may say so, it seems like a very forced connection to make, because the Cenobites, after all, still are the de facto bad guys here.
They most definitely actually are not the bad guys. Like, that is actually kind of or to me, that is very much the brilliance of Hellraiser. And the first two Hellraiser films. We don't count the goddamn rest of the franchise in this diseased pile of arguments, which is this discussion. But in the first two, they are not the bad guys. To give you kind of to be even more rambling about the subject. You have your typical horror movie, which we all have seen many times. Like Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street. And these films present to you an organism, something that exists already, is in a way it's a whole, and the organism has a status quo in itself. Like, you have your Haddonfield, which is a nice peaceful town in Illinois. You have your Elm Street, which once again is nice peaceful town. And then you have an invading or corrupting outsider force. Michael Myers comes to Haddonfield. Freddy Krueger kind of materializes in Elm Street. And this invading force, this other, the element that is not part of the original organism, most often is violent. Like Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger are, they more often than not are more or less complete fucking assholes. Like Freddy Krueger is an open sadist. And they easily carry a even larger societal stigma with them. Like Freddy Krueger is a goddamn child killer, and later on in the franchise he's a downright goddamn pedophile.
But all of them, including Pinhead or the Cenobites, are characters who come to disturb the peaceful surroundings, and they break that peacefulness by their presence of wreaking havoc on unsuspecting people, and nobody wants that. Not in Hellraiser. Well, okay, you could make the argument, yeah, but most of the time, no, and it wasn't even Frank's intention to get such pleasures.
Well, the Cenobites don't do that shit until Hellraiser Part 3. In the first two Hellraisers, they very much are asked to show up. They don't show up unless you summon them. For that you need the clear attention. You need the thrive. You want to see them. Or you want to open the gateway. And that is when the Cenobites themselves show up. And the Cenobites themselves are actually not even interested in wreaking havoc in any sense. Well, in the first two films. Once again, it's a shitstorm from Hellraiser 3 onwards. But the whole modus operandi is that they come and they take the person who has summoned them with them, as the rules demand. And both the film and the book kind of make this notion that Cenobites themselves don't do what they do out of spite. In the film, Pinhead points out that what the Cenobites are, they are explorers of experience. Angels to some, demons to others. To some, Cenobites might very well be the answer to their prayers. And the book makes the same notion through Frank's perspective, where even Frank contemplates that it's very much possible that what the Cenobites' intentions are, they are not evil. Their intentions are not to torture you. Their intentions are to provide you a sexualized experience. But that sexualized experience is so extreme. It's once again, it's that limit experience. It's so rough and it's so foreign to Frank that to him it's torture. But, for example, in Hellraiser 2, with the Cenobites, Hellraiser 2 points out that Cenobites have once been human. And that they are humans who have kind of wandered through their own hell. Like, they became Cenobites after hell had no more surprises in store for them. And through this notion, there is the point that at some point they have accepted what the hell has to offer them. Because of that, they can no longer be tortured by the hell, because they actually enjoy it.
I understand the connection that you can make, that Clive Barker's imagination probably, has gone through such phases that, you can unconsciously or consciously make the parallels here that, okay, well, I am in this situation where my sexuality is not accepted by the society, and I can kind of implement that in my horror film, or it just comes unconsciously in the pages like that. And yeah, I can definitely see that. But to call it gay cinema, I don't know what is the point. What are you saying with the gay cinema?
I'm saying,
I don't know if it was the Clive Barker's intention to draw the parallel or not, but
I don't
still
know.
The effect is not so strong to me that you could kind of group it with like other obvious gay cinema films, dump it into that same group and say that, hey, this is gay cinema.
Well, to approach that point piece by piece, firstly, it of course may be that it was not Barker's knowing intention. There obviously was very much intention in the way how Barker defined Cenobites, or how he approaches his monsters, because the point Barker repeatedly makes his stories is that he is sympathetic towards his monsters. It's the outside world that is... It is our world that is at fault and that is kind of diseased, and the monsters themselves are actually the sympathetic victims of the outside attitudes. People like you and me meet something which is alien to us, and we qualify that as a monster, and we approach that monster with hostility. And in Barker's stories, the monsters, quote-unquote monsters, are more often than not, they are actually accepting and welcoming. In Hellraiser, the Cenobites are welcoming to everyone who has opened the box, and everybody else just sees Cenobites as monsters. In Nightbreed, this is actually the main plot point of the story, where the monsters try to have their own peaceful society, and it's once again the normal people, quote-unquote, who wreak havoc and are attacking the monster population. There is the Skins of the Father short story where there is this whole deceased family dynamic, and a family is trying to shelter themselves against an attack of monsters, and later on it simply turns out that, well, the family itself is both physically and, if I remember correctly, also sexually abusive towards a child, which actually is part of the monster. So, unlike in your typical horror film, where the monster has to be banished for the status quo to be reinforced, Michael Myers has to be stopped, Freddy Krueger has to be killed, so that the status quo can once again live long and prosper. Haddonfield can celebrate Halloween until goddamn 6th film on the franchise, and the brats on Elm Street can once again sleep nicely. In Barker's fiction, it's the other way around. In Barker's fiction, the monsters are accepting. They are asking you to join them, instead of being simply a force that is maleficent and has to be banished.
Yeah, well, I'm still saying that in the first Hellraisers, Cenobites are the monsters. Because
but how are they the monsters?
Because
what is the monstrous thing that they do?
Well, homosexual still doesn't go around the streets, and if somebody goes, let's say, somebody goes to a homosexual's back and takes some kind of cryptical box from there and starts to pleasurefully touch this box, and then this makes the homosexual makes him to be allowed to start killing people randomly in a bar, or at least the person who was pleasuring himself with the box.
No, but once again, the box in itself is a gateway to sexual experience. And
extremely negative ones.
Well, extremely negative ones, but only extremely negative ones on the side point of you and me, of Kirsty and Frank. Once again, the fucking status quo, original organism. To the Cenobites, it may be extremely pleasurable, and if you would learn to enjoy it, who knows? I mean, some obviously find it pleasurable. The whole opening the box and taking you with them is kind of like, to contrast it,
Invitation to what? From heterosexuality to homosexuality. I still cannot make any sense.
Well, maybe going to a gay bar and making all the innuendos that you wanna try gay sex, and then having to actually go through with the experience. If you are just trying it out and you are extremely straight, who knows, maybe you find out that it was not pleasurable at all and it was pure torment.
I get what you're trying to do there. But there's so many doors that you can open with this subject that on one hand it works on this level, and then on the other hand it might not work so well.
Well, that could be, but then again, I actually, and once again, this is something where the straight man in me might be showing up, but I actually have a major axe to grind with your typical presentation of any subject matter. Be it your typical feminist presentation or being it your typical gay presentation in cinema, where I think that it's so goddamn ham-fisted, so goddamn obvious that I actually struggle to believe that the person making the presentation is serious and is not simply trying to do quote-unquote a thing just so that he can pat himself in the back and point out how he's doing the thing, and he's essentially, this awakened filmmaker. To kind of give you a point on this, the TV series, American Horror Story. I don't know, have you watched it?
I think I watched like 2 episodes and I stopped because I got bored.
Okay. Well, the 3rd episode is about witches coming. Basically, edgier Harry Potter in its core.
Yeah, the 2 kids coming to the house of the guy and something like that.
Yeah, the 2 kids is coming to the house. And it's some kind of a witch school. However, the witches coming thing. Well, there is a token male character. The school is all women, but they do have their own Frankenstein experiment, which turns out to be this reanimated dude which hangs around in the house with the witches. This is your token male character in the Witches Coven. And throughout the season, there is a notion to be made that there is some kind of a badass warlock or some shit like that is going after the witches. I don't remember exactly what is the big bad guy at the end of the season, but there is this super powerful sorcerer or demon spirit or something like that. So at the very end, on the final episode, there is the moment when the big bad comes to the coven house and goes a hula baloo how he's going to kill all the fucking witches. The reanimated dude stands up to this guy in a protective fashion, like, your knight in shining armor way. And the big bad automatically, waves his hand and knocks the bastard to the wall. And at this point, the 4 witches form a line, and one of them makes a notion: we don't need a man to protect us. And you can easily see what they are doing there. This is the power girl moment. Yeah. Where the season really showcases you that, the female empowerment. This is female empowerment, the moment.
Yeah.
And I'm not against female empowerment in any way, but doing it this way is so obvious, it's so forced, and it's so ham-fisted that I actually struggle to believe that the creators of the series are serious in their female empowerment message. The whole scene reads to me more like, doing a circus stunt. Just so that you can actually go around and say that, well, I did the female empowerment thing. Look at this scene. I'm doing the thing here. I'm one of the good guys, right? I'm all about that feminism and shit. I'm doing the thing right here.
Yeah.
And I can't take it. I can't see the sincerity in there. And that is the same problem that I run into with many of the more obvious gay presentations in pop culture.
Yeah. So you're saying you like Hellraiser because it's more under the hood, undercover.
Because it's more under the hood, right? Because, to give you another example, there was the UK series Queer Eye for Straight Guys, or something like that. It was Sillä silmällä in Finland.
Yeah, for the love of God.
Yeah. But anyways, the series where there were the 4 gay men, and then they do the change for the straight guy, so that the straight guy becomes more appealing to women. Basically, they teach him some basic cooking and some basic manners, and they teach him how to dress, well, at least better than he used to, because all the straight dudes are complete fucking train wrecks at the beginning of each episode, and you get taught a quick drink recipe and stuff like this. You learn to dress nicely and make a dinner and serve a drink, so that, you have a better luck with the ladies. And that is very obvious gay presentation itself. It showcases 4 gay men enhancing the straight dude's life. But at the same time, the whole thing actually, it works around a stereotype.
I know, and
gay men think like women, basically.
Yeah, there's a funny notion about that. I remember when this series was still running or finished a little while ago, and I was talking about this series with my friend, and we actually did send. Was it for Nelonen that was airing this TV show? We did send to this TV channel a suggestion for a follow-up TV series that you could do in Finland. That was Millä helvetin silmällä. And we switched the roles in a way that it was now a straight guy who was giving like suggestions for a gay guy in some way, but the details escape me. But you get the idea. Usually when you reverse these situations, then you get the notion of how these are so ridiculous.
Yeah, and kind of the underlying theme, the reason why I'm hamping around this is that when being faced by a subject matter that is not directly accepted by the mainstream society, there usually are 2 ways you can actually deal with the situation. The first one is outright rejecting what you are not approving. You can hang the gay dudes, and once you can kill them outright, you can imprison them at least. And if that becomes too extreme, you can say that being gay is okay. But if you die in AIDS, it's the God's will, because you are a filthy sodomite.
Yeah.
And other way is first neutralize the other and then accept it. Like, for example, typifying the gay men as the missing link between man and woman. Gay men are accepted, and they are a great thing because they are men who has women's brains in them. And this way, the society gets to actually define how you can be a gay man. It's very okay that you are gay. It's very okay that you are gay, because we sure as fuck do need that women brain in your body. And in a way, I actually see that in a way, for example, how, for example, Pride marches are being attacked today. While today Pride March as an event is accepted societally, and usually no one goes in and outright tries to say that the Pride March in itself has to be banned. It's too much okay societally. So how the attack works is that you pick someone, one individual participant of that Pride March, who is too kind of extreme in his presentation.
Yeah.
the image of that one participant who has attached dildos to his clothes, for example. Then you single out that image, that one participant, you highlight it to a fucking 10th potence, and then you extremely kind of directly denounce that individual, but while you are doing that, you do it in a way that you no longer kind of deal with the individual, you tie the individual in the gay community and the march as a whole. You show the image of the individual, but the argument you are making is that gays are like the individual in the image. And because of this, Pride March is wrong.
Yeah,
you can have your march as long as you do it how we want you to do it.
Just about those images, it's... Yeah, you hear these horror stories sometimes that some little kid was as a part of a Pride March with some family member, like dad or the mother, and they come across these people who are dressed in like questionable clothing in leather, showing some body parts in a way that some little kids probably should not be exposed to. Or
there's always a goddamn little kid in this argument, ain't there?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's terrible, and I think this kind of shit should be completely removed from the Pride marches, but what are you gonna do about these certain individuals who do that? It's unfortunate, but I don't think it's happening in a large scale. It does happen more in some other countries than some others. For example, I've never seen anything like that in Finland or Poland But now to tie this again to the Hellraiser.
Well, since you made the notion, I actually have a bit different take on should it be allowed or not. Because okay. I think that those individuals also have every right to be, well...
disturbing.
Like they are. Even though it's not very, well, necessarily pleasing to my eye, personally, since I am a straight man. But,
I'm struggling to think who would actually find the pleasureful part in that to their eye.
Well,
if we are talking about these leather motherfuckers in these parades, I think we should approach it from the perspective of would you accept these people walking around like in half-naked costumes or sexually questionable or exposing costumes in the streets with the whole Pride March removed from the picture? No, probably not.
Well, that is how I actually see that gay presentation might actually tie into Hellraiser and in Barker's work. Because the case that Hellraiser, on the other hand, makes is that you should actually accept it. That person is the other. The gay population is the other from the mainstream population. And that individual is other inside the gay population. And Hellraiser's take on the otherness is that it should not be neutralized. The tiger should not lose its claws, but instead it should be the surrounding society who actually should make attempts to understand, accept, and celebrate the difference of the other.
I would still not go and celebrate what they are. They are murderers at the end of the day.
Technically, yeah, they are. But they are murderers who are asked to do what they are doing. I mean, you can't get the experience if you don't break some boundaries.
Yeah, like I said, I think there are just too many loose points. But I mean, I understand one end of this argument, but at the other end, you're talking about characters who kill people.
Who actually...
And they are told what to do.
And characters...
But gay people are not told what to do.
In many ways, gay people actually are told what to do by the society surrounding them.
Well, okay, but I mean in the sense that Pinhead and buddies are told what to do by some higher entity, I guess.
Yeah, but, that is not directly tying into the gay population as a large, because what the Cenobites are, they are still part of a religious sect. There is still the religious aspect to Cenobites.
Yeah,
much like a gay priest in Vimier is told what to do by the church. Still does not qualify him as a priest or as a character.
Yeah, well, if you start to mix the religion to the picture, it's getting
well,
more
but the religion is obvious in the picture. Like pointed out, Cenobite is a following of a monastic order, and they do have a goddamn god. They are priests.
It is, and that has nothing to do with like sexuality.
No, it does not have anything to do with sexuality, but it has everything to do with them having to follow the rules, having to follow someone. That's what priest does. He follows God. He follows the Holy Catholic Church or whatnot. But what actually in Cenobites has to, in my opinion, has to do with homosexuality is the need that the Cenobites present to be understood. They are the other. And if you would be able to understand, or if you would be willing to understand the other, you might not be so extremely opposed to them.
Yeah,
What I'm driving at is that if you and me could understand Cenobites, we could find something to celebrate in them. Or at least
I get that point.
Be accepting of what they are and how they are.
I get that point. It's just a tad bit uncomfortable, maybe, to kind of juxtapose homosexuality or sexuality with Hell's Angels, but I understand completely what you're talking about.
And that is, that uncomfortability is precisely the point why I myself am not completely feel myself safe here talking about the point, because, well, once again, that straight man showing up.
And I'm not saying...
No, but it still is the case where it's very easy for me to offend, in this case, the other, the gay population.
Yeah, I don't know. I most likely haven't internalized all of that you have right now said, and I haven't had enough time to think about it. I did read your memo quick, but there's a lot to note here.
Yeah, and my memo, like basically everything that I try to piece together from my mind, is extremely rambling and incomprehensible, because, because I wrote it as I was, pacing it through in my mind, and my mind is a ever-raging chaos. So, whenever I try to put the products of my own comprehension to paper, it's always a complete clusterfuck. But to still come back to your point of the murder, committing the act of murder, when they come and take you with them, there is also something that I like to point out with the Cenobites, is that in case of Hellraiser, and still the 1-2 films, because the third one fucks this up, the Cenobites actually committing the act of murder is actually sort of a blessing to the society which the member who they take with them is part of. Frank is an irredeemable fucking asshole.
Yeah,
it's made clear he is a petty criminal, he is a career criminal. There is hints that he has killed people before. So in all the sense and purposes, Frank is a rotten apple. Same way as is Julia, as the story progresses. And in a way, the Cenobites are actually doing the whole world a favor by removing Frank from the equation. The status quo that is the society is actually healthier without Frank and Julia in it. Like, Larry could have actually survived the whole proceedings unharmed had the Cenobites been noted of Frank's escape sooner.
So the Cenobites are the sexually different characters who are bound by the rules of their cult. And Frank that is being torn into pieces is who? The evil politician from a corrupt government?
No, I wouldn't take it that far. Still, Frank is, to my eye, Frank is a rotten apple of the society who still actually would not be in any way in danger of coming into contact with the Cenobites. But Frank begs to meet the Cenobites. he goes to any lengths to get his hands on the box, which is the way of summoning the Cenobites. Frank may not precisely know how becoming to contact with Cenobites would work, and the short story most specifically makes the notion that Frank was expecting something else than what he actually got at the end of the proceedings. But Frank still very much wanted what happened to him. Not precisely to be torn into pieces, but he did want to meet the Cenobites. He did want very clearly to experience what the Cenobites have to offer. To a point where in the book, the Cenobites even still, they ask from Frank, are you sure? And make the notion that, there is no turning back after this, and Frank is, no, please take me.
Yep, I paid attention to this particular point, that they were actually given a choice in the book for Frank, but in the film, no.
In the film, no, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that, well, in the book, in all honesty's sake, there also have to be made the notion that they may not have been completely sincere when they offered Frank, quote-unquote, the chance. Because when in the book, when Kirsty opens the box, well, in that case, the Cenobite clearly states that, he is going to take Kirsty because Kirsty opened the box, and that apparently has happened before, but, what can you do? Rules are rules. But there is still, even if you don't count in the Cenobites giving Frank a warning at the very beginning of the book, there still is the fact that acquiring the box, actually, it takes quite a lot of effort from you. And then you have to dig around with the box for some time to actually get it open. So you need the intent. You need to have the drive. You need to want to open the box or see what it is all about before you actually get the Cenobites to show up. The second film in the series, Hellbound, makes this even more clearer through the character of Dr. Channard, who in that film is the one who wants to summon the Cenobites. And the way how he does it is that he runs an sanitarium, so he gives the box to one of his patients, who is extremely good with puzzles. And that patient actually opens the box, and the Cenobites appear. And in that moment, Pinhead precisely makes the point that they are not to touch the patient, because the patient is just a proxy. The person who they are to claim is Dr. Channard, who has the desire.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in such a long time. Looking forward to touching Hellbound later.
Maybe in some future episode, even though, all this shit might be even funnier if we would touch the later installments in the franchise and you would just cover some complete shit show.
Yeah, I mean, we could go through the entire franchise, but not one after the other. Like very, very slowly.
Those are some sides that I don't want to be shown to me. I don't know, I've seen the entire franchise up until Judgment, and I most likely will check out Judgment at some point. So in that sense, it's a ride that I already have once suffered through. I can take another go, if need be. But that is kind of the point why I myself would make the argument that Hellraiser could be, or should maybe be, granted as a gay cinema. Because through the subject of other, Hellraiser makes the point that we as a whole, we should accept the other, whoever that is, and we should celebrate how the other is different from us. And I think that there is a weight to us. I think that a gay man can be extremely beautiful, even though, I don't get that sexual attraction myself, but still, I think that they should be celebrated. I think the individual gay man should be celebrated as the other. And because it's not done so straightforwardly, because you are not given that moment in film where a lone gay man bursts into scene in the last minute and brings out the point how he was all the time. He knew that there was something in Julia because he figured it out with female brain or some shit like that. Because of that, I feel that in its presentation, Hellraiser is more sincere and it's more honest than, for example, American Horror Story Season 3.
Yeah.
And I see value in it.
So is that a no-go for a Hellraiser the Feminist Edition, where Pinhead is played by Angelina Jolie?
Like it was in the original book? Do you mean? But no, I think that, when it comes to femininity, Hellraiser kind of has that one covered also in the character of Kirsty. And with the fact that, unlike your typical horror movie where Michael Myers is stabbed by the kitchen knife, and, Jason is hacked with an axe or some other phallic symbol shit, Kirsty kind of beats the Cenobites by closing the box.
Yeah, but I have to disappoint our listeners, I guess. I'm not going to specifically go head on and say that you are absolutely wrong, because you're not. You have made valid points. So I'm not going to be just here to argue against your points for the whole night.
See, now you are disappointing the listeners.
Yeah. I have already made some points against some of your arguments there.
You have.
But it's not something that you can just completely throw into the trash can. There are some good points.
Yeah, and in the end, I guess that these are the arguments and these are the discussions where everybody who has a stake in the matter, deserves the right to be a judge. I can't climb up on a high horse and tell the gay men of the world that Hellraiser is presentation of your sexuality. Period. I have spoken, and I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to hit anyone in the head here with a hammer. And, I'm not trying to say that it absolutely is. And there is no business saying anything otherwise. But I'm merely, I try to lay out my point, my perspective on the matter. I try to argument it as best as I can, seeing how extremely difficult the subject matter is and seeing how English is not my native tongue. So this is complete fucking nightmare for me. But I still try to make a compelling argument for my point. And everyone listening, can take that point and simply tear it up and burn it in flames if they so choose. But I don't know, maybe someone actually agrees with me and finds something more to see in Hellraiser. Maybe someone can find a horror movie where he can feel that it's an adequate presentation of him. Or maybe someone simply, can get the notion that if we can discuss about this one aspect of the film for fucking half an hour, well, maybe all horror films are not just stupid. Maybe there is some intelligence to be found in horror as a genre. That's more than enough for me.
That's true, but so we can say a lot of things in this podcast and nobody cares because we don't have enough listeners, and we are waiting for the Hellfires to bring when we get more listeners to this podcast.
Yeah, so at some undisclosed time in future, this podcast, someone finding these episodes years later will destroy both of our political careers.
Yeah, I bet we have been like good boys for 3 years at some point with this podcast, if it ever goes so wrong or so long, and we have built slowly a very nice amount of audience, and then somebody just goes back in the timeline and finds this Hellraiser episodes and reports our podcast and destroys us.
You have been the president of Finland for 7 years, and all of a sudden someone finds your old podcast episodes, and that was that.
Right. Oh, well, this has been very thorough in kind of in the psychological points again, which is great because has already been millions of podcasts about Hellraiser, the film, and its scenes and its shots and all the traditional stuff that you can make up as you go. But thank you for us, for our thoughts. Thank you for
thank you for anyone who has managed to stick by. We are on the 6th hour of goddamn recording at this point.
This episode will burn in hell, and
we with it.
Before we proceed to burn eternally, we have such websites to show you. Did I just say that? We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter page. You can find us on YouTube, where you will be able to find our episodes with a slight delay, because it takes a little bit more time, unfortunately, to punch them out there. And we have also Instagram, so plenty of ways to join us. And you can also get in touch via email. You can find all the details on thefleeklab.libsyn.com or whatever might be our website in the future. That's where you'll find us. The Fleek Lab. You will find it in your favorite search engine, most probably.
You are all special and beautiful. Please remember that.
And next week, Henrik, we are going to watch Dumbo. Are you feeling very Dumbo right now? Don't answer it.
My ears are already flapping.
The original from 1941, not the live action that is going to take place soon, but that's why we are taking a look at this original.
To reminiscent the time when the film was still good.
Yeah, more than likely. But we haven't watched the live action. Most likely we won't. Until next week. We have such shots. We have such sights to show you.
Mä vuosia sitten opin siihen, että huomasin asian tiimoilta sen. Sulla on paljon vääriä mielipiteitä. Niitä ei vaan voi auttaa.
In English indeed.
Yep, it's complete. I mean, who made the goddamn?
I mean, we still get by through. I don't know how to say this at this hour. Miten se sanotaan, jos en tiedä. Siis se, että niinku